What up, party people, and welcome to another edition of Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the sure-to-be-amazing World of Warcraft Classic. Today, it's Monday, so it's time for an interview, and I'll be playing an interview I conducted with avid PvP and eSports fan OhhGee, which equally covers two topics. First, we discuss the possibility of World of Warcraft Classic making any waves whatsoever in eSports circles, and then around the 53-ish minute mark or so, check the show notes for the exact timing, we break down the state of PvP in vanilla World of Warcraft as OhhGee really flexes his PvP muscles and gives some amazing insight into weapons, items, battleground tactics, and general strategies to keep in mind for those looking to shed some serious blood of the opposing faction in World of Warcraft Classic. After that, it's time for a listener call on today's Calling Countdown as listener Riv calls in and we speak about the mysterious legendary item Talisman of the Binding Shard, as well as lightly touching on older gamers playing World of Warcraft Classic. Just before I play those calls, I should let you all know that I'll be live streaming an interview this Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that interview is a special one, as it's with former Blizzard staffer and vanilla developer John Statz. We finally got someone who is actually there making the game that we all love. Hooray! John worked on the design of many of the instances in-game, as well as non-instance cave or dungeon-y type areas. So many of the questions will be focused on that area of the game, as well as touching on life at Blizzard during the vanilla days and his thoughts on the Classic project, amongst many others. So please do follow me on Twitch at Countdown to Classic and turn on your notifications so that you can join in on the fun when that one starts up. I truly hope this is the first of many interviews to come on the show with people who had a hand in creating the game that we all love. You can also follow me on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2 and sign up to the Countdown to Classic Discord and leave the show a review on iTunes if you haven't already. That really helps out. If you're enjoying what's going on here over at Countdown to Classic, please head on over to the show's Patreon page and see how you can help support Countdown to Classic to continue to bring you a diverse spread of interviewees. All the links you'll need are in the show notes for each episode. If you want to hit me up with some feedback or submit a memory lane or an anger management of your own, you can always hit me up at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com as well. But with all that said, let's get to this deep dive with OhhGee in today's featured interview. All right, we've got another caller on the line now, and who are we speaking with, and where in the world are you calling from?
I am the one and only OhhGee, and I'm calling from my basement in Boston, Massachusetts.
Excellent. Thanks so much for calling in, OhhGee. Obviously, the listeners won't know, you and I have teed this up over a few weeks now. We've just been trying to find a window of opportunity where both of us are free. Thank you so much for being here, basically. I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to it.
All right, so for everyone's benefit, this is going to be a bit of a PvP/eSports focused interview, and we'll get into why OhhGee is the best person to talk to about that subject. So we'll go through the regular questions that we do here on Countdown to Classic in terms of getting a bit more information about OhhGee and getting to know him a little bit more. So let's go through the regular 10 questions, or 9 questions it is now. So OhhGee, how long have you played World of Warcraft?
I started playing World of Warcraft, I think around 2005, 2006. It was most of the vanilla content timeline was through when I started playing. And I was pretty young. I was playing on a laptop and had no clue what I was doing. I'd actually never even played a PC game at this point. So it was a slog. By the time I got to level 60, Burning Crusade had actually come out. I think it took me a solid year to hit 60 on a keyboard turning laptop warrior. So my beginnings were very humble, but I guess about 13 or 14 years.
Alrighty. And what was your original main character's name, class, and race?
My first character was an orc warrior named Boogidaba. That's like a word I made up when I was a little kid. I guess I used to just say that all the time. Yeah.
And what other classes have you hit a level cap with?
Rogue, warlock, priest, and mage.
Which server did you play on when you started?
I played Stonewall US. It was pretty backwater. I rolled there because a bunch of guys that I played Halo with, they all got into WoW and they were on that server. So,
did you play on a PvP or a PvE server?
Oh yeah. I've always played PvP servers.
All right, excellent. Out of interest, what was your highest raid experience back in the vanilla days and anything post vanilla?
I did not raid in vanilla. Like I said, I was a little scrub. I was still leveling. In Burning Crusade, I raided up to like Tempest Keep and Serpent Shrine Cavern. Nothing too impressive. I was in a more legit raiding guild in Lich King, and I got a faction first heroic in Ice Crown Citadel. So most of my raiding was around the Lich King time. But I've always been somebody that I play the game for PvP. If I'm raiding, it's probably because I have to obtain something that I want for PvP. So. And
are you currently playing World of Warcraft, and if so, where?
Yes, I'm currently playing on Northdale. I'm pretty casual because I play other games and full-time job, the YouTube and the casting. So I have a lot going on. But I'm slowly but surely leveling on Northdale, and I'm also actually planning on playing a little BFA. I'm not super enthusiastic about it, but my brother sort of guilted me into playing with him and bought me like a boosted 110 character. So I'm sort of obligated to at least try it out. And I will be playing a bit of that and possibly streaming a bit of it too.
Okay, excellent. Now, do you have a quick plug for any places online where people can find you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. The best place to find me is definitely Twitter. My username's OhhGee, as in the two letters, just OhhGee_haptics. You can also find me on YouTube. My channel focuses very heavily on vanilla content. And you can find me on Twitch. I'm not going to be super active on Twitch until Classic Beta releases because, you can't stream private servers without getting in trouble. But my Twitch username is /OhhGeeHaptics, as all one word, no underscore in that one. And to find my YouTube, you can just search my name and you can find it pretty easily.
All right. Now complete this sentence so we know where your allegiances lie. For the
Alliance.
All right, there you go. Now, that's a bit of a background into you as a World of Warcraft player. And what I want to get into now is sort of, people might be wondering, okay, well, this is a PvP related interview. This is an eSports related interview. Why is Josh talking to this person about eSports? So now that we've got the World of Warcraft resume out of the way, why don't you go ahead and tell people a little bit about your eSports background and your experience in that world?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I got into esports, the word esports didn't exist. I first discovered competitive gaming around 2003, 2004, while I was playing Halo 2. At the time, Halo 2, believe it or not, was the biggest game in North America. It was one of the biggest games in the world, and it had a huge following as a competitive scene. So I was playing a lot of Halo, and I thought I was pretty good until I saw video footage of like the very best players, and I was just totally mind blown. So this was before Justin TV or Twitch existed, and YouTube had little to no quality gaming content. So it was a different time in a lot of ways because top level gameplay was not accessible the way it is today. You couldn't just turn on a stream and watch a professional player to learn the game. You had to sort of figure shit out yourself. And the competitive scene was also much less accessible. There weren't websites with leagues and stuff. You couldn't just sign up somewhere and participate in a ladder. You just had to grind the game until good players noticed you or respected you enough to invite you to custom lobbies. In Halo 2, the matchmaking system was pretty crap, and tournaments actually used a very, very different rule set. So it wasn't even really possible to experience the competitive side of the game or like, play in a real, tournament rule set unless you were in like custom lobbies with the good players. So it was much less accessible. And when I finally, found footage of like, the best players in the world, I was hooked right away. And I just, started spending a ton of time on the websites and the forums where the good people seem to hang out. I just grinded the game. I discovered MLG, Major League Gaming, which at the time was a very, very grassroots organization. And when I say grassroots, I mean like the tournaments took place in the event rooms at hotels. There was no such thing as salaried players. There was no such thing as eSports organizations. You just kind of met guys on Xbox Live, made a team, practiced, and prayed that they actually showed up at the LAN. One time I actually had to convince my mom to drive me 14 hours to New York so I could play in an MLG tournament. And she did it because she's the world's best mom. But yeah, it was crazy, man. It was just, the scene was so much different. It was so much like breaking into it and it was a lot different. And you could, like I said, the high level gameplay wasn't really that accessible. So there was a lot of mystery to it. And the events themselves, forgive me if I'm rambling, but
no, not at all. Go for it.
I love reminiscing about these days, man. The events themselves were crazy too, man. There really weren't any rules. You could stand up out of your chair and call the kid on the other team's mom a whore, and you weren't going to get fined or thrown out. It was trash talk was definitely like part of the competition. People would always be trying to get inside each other's heads, and the best part was that gaming headsets with microphones built into them didn't exist yet either.
Right.
So everyone just wore Sennheisers. They were the best headphones at the time for gaming. And you just screamed your call outs at the top of your lungs so that like your teammates could hear you. And you would lose your voice by the end of the tournament. So it was really crazy, man. It was kind of like I think of it sort of like the wild, wild west of esports. It was so much different than it is today, with the professionalism and the organizations and all that. So Halo 2 was what really introduced me to competitive gaming. And I've just been hooked ever since.
Okay. And since those Halo days, what are you kind of focused on now? Listeners might not be aware. We had originally planned to do this call last week, but you got called away for a very good reason. What was that?
Yeah. So there's a huge Counter-Strike tournament in North America called Fragadelphia. It's one of, and actually now after this past weekend, the biggest open CSGO tournament in the world. So as far as open tournaments that anyone can pay the fee and enter, this is the biggest one. So I do a bit of casting, like commentary, with eSports, specifically CSGO. And I had a chance to travel to Philadelphia and cast Fragadelphia last weekend. So it was super fun. We had 52 teams show up, $40,000 prize pool. There were a lot of professional players there. So I got to cast some unbelievable Counter-Strike. It was really great. It's just a fantastic event.
Okay. Well, now that we've gotten your esports background, one final setup. We're going to be talking about PvP a lot and vanilla PvP. Can you please tell people a little bit about your PvP resume in terms of back in the vanilla days? And I know you said you were a bit of a young scrub back then, but sort of post the vanilla days, whether that be by way of private servers or what have you. What's your PvP experience?
Well, by the time Burning Crusade rolled around, I was starting to kind of figure stuff out. I had keybinds and played with a mouse and knew how to properly play. And it was in late Burning Crusade that I switched to Mage, and I found the class came much more naturally to me than Warrior. So I started dabbling in Arena in Burning Crusade. In Lich King, I got really, really into Arena. I was never amazing. I never got Gladiator, but I pushed up to like 2,400 about in Arena in Lich King a few seasons. When Cataclysm came out, I actually stayed subscribed for the sole purpose of playing RBGs because they were new, and I thought that was really cool. So I played up to about the same, like 2,500 rating when RBGs were new, but I quit pretty early on in Cataclysm. I just couldn't stand the game. So after that, couple years with no WoW, and then 2012, I discovered private servers. My first private server, I played a rogue up to rank 11. Nostarius came out. I played a mage to rank 13. Nestarius got shut down. I re-rolled and played another mage to rank 13, and then made a little PvP movie that you might have seen. So
Excellent. Okay. Now, we've got a lot of your background there. So thank you so much for giving us a bit of a history about you. And just so everyone is aware, I'm going to set the stage now for a bit of a prolonged eSports chat in regards to vanilla World of Warcraft. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of whether or not you think, OhhGee, that vanilla World of Warcraft could work as an esport when Classic rolls out. But I just want to set the platform here with, and what we do on these interviews is I generally read out a bunch of quotes of news articles or forum posts that I found to run by you and get your comment on. So I'll just start with this first one that I found this morning from an old article this year in the Australian Financial Review, which is actually, believe it or not, a very reputable news source. So I'll just read this quote to you and get your comment on it. And this is just about esports in general, and bear with me for a moment here. So they say, Goldman Sachs says esports are moving into the mainstream. The professionalization of what was previously seen as computer games has paved the way for esports to reach nearly 300 million viewers by 2022, which would put it on par with NFL viewership in the United States alone. Esports particularly are exploding in Australia and New Zealand at a year-on-year growth of 20.6%, making it the fastest growing the fastest growing entertainment sector in Australia and New Zealand. Last year's Fortnite World Cup had a tournament prize pool exceeding $100 million US. Those contributing to the prize pool included Activision, whose year-on-year return of 36.28% has impressed investors. Those questioning esports' merit should first analyze the statistics. According to Nielsen and Rentrack, total cumulative viewership for major sports finals in 2017 placed the Super Bowl first with 124 million viewers, and the world's premier esports competition, League of Legends, second with 58 million, placing it ahead of international cricket with 46 million, the World Series with 38 million, and the NBA Finals with 32 million. So, why have I read that prolonged post out to you? It's for this. Why don't you explain to us why you believe... Well, no, let me change that. What is it about esports that has it completely blowing up, and any of those figures obviously not news to you, and it's something that's simply just understandably growing and growing, and people are losing their minds over, and it's becoming more and more conducive to viewership on TV and online?
Well, I think esports gives people something that they didn't know they wanted until they saw it. If that makes sense. I have a saying. I like to say that traditional sports are 90% physical and 10% mental. And I like to say that esports are simply 90% mental and 10% physical. I think that there are some really cool things that apply to esports that don't apply to traditional sports, namely the fact that genetics or gender or your height or your weight or whatever doesn't put you at any type of advantage or disadvantage. Any human being that has average or above intelligence and the dedication to really grind a game can get very, very good at a game. And I love the way that if you put in the time, you can get the result you want. That's something I've always loved about games. I have little to no natural Counter-Strike ability. I'm terrible naturally at Counter-Strike, but I really grinded the game for about 2 years, until I felt like I didn't suck, until I felt like I could hang, on competitive servers and enjoy myself. So I think that's really cool. And I also think it's really cool that esports require you to work within a very finite set of rules. So, in traditional sports, people are always coming up with, new, plays or tricks or tactics or whatever. And a lot of times they sort of, enter into the gray areas of the rules, and the rules, have to be modified because people start doing something new. But with video games, there's a very finite set of you can do this, but you can't do this. And LeBron James is a freak of nature athlete, physically, and so he can do things that other players simply can't, in the NBA. But in a video game, it's not like that. Everyone is playing the exact same thing, and it's all about who can manipulate the mechanics of the game the best. So I just think it's really intriguing, and I think it's an incredibly cool form of competition.
In terms of World of Warcraft as an esport, obviously we've got the knee-jerk reaction of PvP. Let's watch some arenas. Let's watch to a lesser extent perhaps some battlegrounds or things like that. But more recently, we had things come along like the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, and I'll just read you another quick quote from an article I found online that says this. This is from invenglobal.com that says, with the introduction of Mythic Dungeon Invitationals, World of Warcraft seems to have found an improved way to spotlight how competitive and entertaining the game can be. Just this weekend during the first Mythic Dungeon Invitational Global LAN Finals, Twitch.tv viewership of the event peaked at an impressive 98,370 viewers. To put this number into context, the BlizzCon 2017 Arena World Championships reportedly peaked at 79,865 views. Now, similar numbers, MDI reaching similar numbers during its very first major event without the benefit of a BlizzCon backdrop is an impressive success for the much newer format. So my follow-up question from that short article is this one. Do you believe that were you surprised by the success of PvE related esports? And is it something that you're particularly interested in?
I was very surprised, but then when I started, sort of thinking about it, I really wasn't. I think that something like the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, I think that that's more accessible than like an Arena World Championship. Even if you play PvP or you play the game, watching the best players in the world play Arena, there's going to be stuff that kind of goes over your head that you don't notice. You're not going to necessarily be able to follow, global by global, every single ability these guys are using and know why they're doing it. However, with the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, anybody that plays World of Warcraft on any skill level can fully appreciate everything that's going on. I was really impressed by the sort of visual format that they used for that Mythic Dungeon thing. I thought it was really cool how they had like a split screen and you could kind of watch both guys run, both groups run. And there were a few times where one side knew of like a little skip or something like that, a cheeky little time save. So it was really cool to sort of see them side by side and watch the effect that those small little time saves have. That being said, I don't have a ton of interest in that personally. I have some trouble kind of taking it seriously, if I'm being honest. But clearly there's an audience for it, and that's all that matters. If there are people out there that enjoy it and like it, then it should exist. Whether no matter how I feel about it. So.
Okay, well, let's talk a bit more now about why World of Warcraft PvP works as an esport. And I'll just read you this forum post from user iHasMechBunny over at the WoW official forums, who says this. In regular sports, the camera follows the ball because that's the central objective of the game. But the thing is, there's only one ball. Every battleground has more than one objective, so therefore the camera, quote unquote, would have to choose what action to follow. You'd miss a lot. WoW shouldn't even be trying to be an esport. So what do you have to say about when you hear, there are a lot of negative opinions about WoW as an esport in regards to PvP. What do you have to say in sort of reply to a comment like that?
Well, I think there's a lot of legitimacy to what that person said. And honestly, I'm kind of a purist when it comes to like the word esports. I was saying I grew up on Halo, though that series went to shit a long time ago. And these days, there are really only 4 games that I think are truly, truly legitimate esports. And when I say that, I mean, games that are worthy of, people devoting their lives to them and competing for millions of dollars. So number one is Counter-Strike, hands down. It has the highest skill ceiling of any game on the planet. And it's also the most spectator-friendly game, which that's where I was going. You mentioned the spectator experience and the camera sort of having to focus on one objective at a time. That's extremely important. You cannot have a good esport without a good spectator experience, because without spectators, who cares? So Counter-Strike has an unbelievable spectator system. It's super, super easy to keep track of everything happening in the match. Anyone can appreciate a sick play, even if they don't understand the nuances of the game. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have another one of those 4 games that I really respect as an esport is Overwatch. I have great respect for Overwatch. Blizzard designed the game from the ground up for competitive play, and they do an incredible job of constantly balancing the meta. That being said, I think the main thing that's holding Overwatch back is the spectator experience. In a 12 versus 12 battle, and you're just spectating from the first person perspective of one player, there are so many abilities and stuff flying around. There's going to be shit on the back lines that you don't really see depending on who's being spectated. So spectator experience is extremely important, and that's something I think is holding Overwatch back. The other 2 out of those 4 games that I was going to mention are obviously League of Legends and Dota. I'm terrible at MOBAs, so I don't really play them, but I have enormous respect for the nuances and the skill caps. And those games get around the spectator issue because they have the top-down view, so you can really see everything that's happening. So it would definitely be a problem. I think it would be a huge problem in Arathi Basin or other battlegrounds. The one where I really feel like it could work in vanilla is Warsong Gulch, because typically in Warsong Gulch, there's only going to be 1 or 2 meaningful fights happening at a time. Usually in Warsong Gulch, if there was someone operating a camera, sort of in third person zooming around, they would usually be able to focus on one event at a time in a Warsong Gulch match that's really, impacting the outcome of the game.
You mentioned Overwatch there, and one thing I was a little bit surprised by when in my research for this interview was the kind of backlash online that I found to watching Overwatch as an esport. And I had just presumed that Overwatch was a relatively beloved spectator experience as an esport. But I'll read you the following post that I found in regards to WoW Classic and its potential as an esport, where I found a forum on the WoW Classic official forums, where someone has basically said, a user, Solar Angel, has said this. After years of players perfecting their classes at PvP, in comes Classic WoW. Why not do an eSports league, 3-on-3s, 5-on-5s, 10-on-10s, battlegrounds, etc., etc.? What do you think? And they got this reply from a user named Eronial, who says, even fewer people would watch Classic WoW as an esport than the Overwatch League, which is impressive because no one watches Overwatch League. And they go on to say, I'm aware how top-level vanilla PvP is. It's just still a super lame thing to watch. You want an esport? Go watch StarCraft 2 or CSGO. WoW is terrible for it. So one thing I'd ask you coming off of that is sort of, only very, very briefly, I find it very funny that Overwatch does get a bit of hate. But then more importantly, what is it that Classic WoW could focus on as positives to draw people in as a spectator experience?
I would say, number one, the intricacy. The game that, the version of vanilla that you see when you just queue up a casual battleground is a totally different game than the version of vanilla that you see when 2 pre-mades are going all out against one another. Most of the engineering items, gadgets, and potions are not on the global cooldown. And that is what really makes the skill ceiling in vanilla so high. If you take the classes at face value and you're just talking about class abilities, it's really, really simple. And that would be terribly boring to watch. But if, quote unquote, vanilla esports was a situation where all of the players were given every engineering item, 100 of each potion, it would be unbelievable to watch because there are so many things going on and so many abilities being used. That's a double-edged sword because when there's that much going on, you run into the issue of, spectator experience. But with good casters, it would be great. Good casters are what make Overwatch watchable. Semler is one of the best casters on the planet. The Overwatch League kind of stole him away from the Counter-Strike scene. And because Overwatch is, kind of a clusterfuck, good casters is really, really important. So I think similarly with good casters, a Warsong Gulch match between 2 really good pre-mates would be unbelievable to watch because there's so much happening and there's so many small nuanced things that the players are doing.
All right. Well, now that you've brought up Warsong Gulch and pre-mades. Let's get a bit more into the nitty-gritty of kind of the things we might come to expect if Classic WoW did take off as an esport. And I'm just going to read you a relatively long post here that I found over at the WoW Classic subreddit. So please, everyone, do bear with me through this one. But just let me know if you recognize this one at all. So here's what this poster said. This is based on the current meta, not vague memories from 2004. The standard optimal setup for Warsong Gulch is a druid, a rogue, a paladin/shaman, a hunter/warlock, 2 priests, 2 mages, and 2 warriors. Have the druid as a flag carrier, rogue defends flag room, hunter/warlock defends ramp /outside base, and rotates into mid when necessary. Good communication between rogue and hunter/lock is very important for effective defense. Blah, 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 blah. It goes on. Do you recognize that post at all?
Yeah, I wrote that.
She sure did. Now, the reason I'm quoting you back to you is you seem to have a fairly rigid view of obviously what an optimal setup is in Warsong Gulch. And you've mentioned Warsong Gulch a couple of times now. Do you feel that if Classic WoW were to take off, it's pretty much going to be based on Warsong Gulch? Or do you think there's any hope for Alterac Valley or Arathi Basin?
As an esport?
Yeah, as an esport.
No. I mean, I guess Arathi Basin, theoretically you could try, but you would miss all kinds of stuff. There are so many like meaningful battles happening on the map at one time in Arathi Basin, and just the simple fact of 15 players per team, that would be extraordinarily difficult to actually have teams of 15 players that are highly organized, and the roster size gets a little too big, and I think the spectator experience is going to be rough with Arathi Basin. Warsong Gulch, I think, if I were going to make a vanilla WoW esports league, it would be Warsong Gulch, and the main problem that you really face with vanilla is the fact that shamans and paladins are faction specific. So what you would have to do is, number one, I think the best solution would be to have matches be a best of 5 series. The top seeded team gets to choose which faction they start on, and the teams switch factions after each match of the best of 5. I think that would be the best solution. The only other solution that I can think of would be some kind of custom game client that lets you have paladins and shamans on both sides. But if they went that route, the meta would be drastically affected. It would be a totally different game. If you could have like a shaman and a paladin with a warrior, like that's just retarded. It would be a different game. So there are a lot of barriers, man. There are a lot of barriers to Classic WoW, being a legitimate esport. But I think the best shot would be only Warsong Gulch, multi-match series with the 2 teams switching factions.
All right. Now, sorry, I for the listeners' benefit and your benefit, I didn't mean to yada sort of the bulk of your post there. It's just that it was an extensive, very well thought out, very well written post. It's like Seinfeld where I yada the best part, like the sex. Like you had some great points in there. But you clearly know your stuff in terms of PvP makeup. But my next question would be this, and here's another post that I found on the WoW official forums from a user named Champlains, who says this. In fact, I would argue that making an MMO as an esport, having an esport element ruins it, as it now requires competitive level balancing, which almost always means homogenization. So you've touched a little bit on very, very lightly in terms of class makeup and balance in the game. What do you think is the detriment or perhaps a positive aspect of vanilla World of Warcraft in terms of how some people feel that the classes are relatively unbalanced and how that might affect the game as an esport? Do you fear that it does kind of have to be homogenized and a little bit to work as an esport, or vanilla WoW can still do it with things like, paladins not being necessarily the best PvPers and things of that nature?
I definitely see where that person is coming from, and that's another source of my kind of skepticism. I feel like I should just say this because I don't want to confuse people about my opinion, and I don't want to come across as being wishy-washy. So my sort of professional opinion, or like my official, I guess you could say my official opinion, as an esports fan and a CSGO caster, is that I have serious reservations about vanilla WoW as an esport, and not so sure. That being said, as a vanilla fan, like as just a guy sitting here that loves vanilla PvP, I think it would be fucking awesome. So it's I'm on the fence and I'm really torn. But just speaking from the vanilla fan in myself, I kind of see what that guy's saying. With hindsight, I loved Arena in Burning Crusade and Lich King, but when I look back, I sort of think that was kind of a bad thing for the game. And part of what makes vanilla so incredible is that it's an MMORPG in the purest form. And esports and competitive PvP definitely sort of start to chip away at that purity, that old school MMO purity. And I think that sort of purity is so important to the people that are excited about classic WoW, that anything that would have a negative effect on that, that magic feeling that vanilla has, I wouldn't want. So yeah, I'm torn, man. It's hard.
Okay. Here's another aspect that I think isn't often talked about in terms of how classic WoW could work again as a draw to the audience in terms of esports. And this is a post from a user named Tyandra, again over at the WoW Classic official forums, who says this: I think taking any sort of game with a high amount of RNG seriously as an esport is an exercise in futility. So, we've talked about all these other games, CSGO, Overwatch, things like that. What do you have to say about the point where RNG kind of messes with the skill level? Or, I mean, not necessarily the skill level. I know you still, have to be a highly skilled player to do well in vanilla PvP, but you do kind of lean on that luck of the draw with RNG as well. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, what that person is basically saying is, if you're playing in an international tournament for $1 million, there should not be any random number chance for the lesser player to win, period. And I totally agree with that point of view. Hearthstone as an esport, get the fuck out of here. Like, you got to be kidding me. Fortnite, people are trying to push Fortnite as competitive. It has bloom. Like when you shoot, your aim reticle blooms and your bullets can go anywhere within the bloom, and it's the aiming is so random. And Battle Royale in general, tons of RNG. So, Hearthstone, Battle Royale games, all kinds of stuff that's being pushed as esports these days, I have a lot of trouble taking seriously because of RNG. Now, in vanilla, like a 10 versus 10, Warsong Gulch Battleground, I think the amount of times that you're going to see RNG decide the outcome of a game is extraordinarily small. So it really doesn't concern me in a battleground scenario. Like a 1v1 or a duel scenario, yeah, but vanilla is not balanced around 1v1 anyway. It's very rock, paper, scissors in terms of dueling. So I'm sort of speaking about all this just through the lens of Warsong Gulch.
Sure thing. Now, again, we bring up that battleground of Warsong Gulch, and we've talked about ones that might work, ones that might not work in terms of classic WoW. Now, I'm completely going hypothetical here, and I know this just isn't going to fucking happen, but, we like to live in a world of hypotheticals as well, so let's talk about it. That's what we do as WoW fans. I'm just going to read you the following quote from Rob Pardo about something that happened through the design in vanilla World of Warcraft. And that quote is from a Engadget article that I found. And Rob Pardo said the following: "We didn't engineer the game and classes and balance around arenas. We just added them on. So it continues to be a very difficult thing to balance. Is World of Warcraft a PvE cooperative game or a competitive PvP game? There's constant pressure on the class balance team. There's pressure on the game itself. And a lot of times players who don't PvP don't understand why their classes are changing. I don't think we ever foresaw how much tuning and tweaking we'd have to do to balance things in that direction." And that was in relation to, sorry, I should have set this up, in relation to a question about arenas being implemented in World of Warcraft. Now, here's my follow-up question, taking into consideration Rob Pardo's comments there. How would you feel about something being created for Classic WoW in order to appeal to the esports crowd if it were something outside of the Gurubashi arena and an actual new, like, proper, just arenas for Classic WoW? Do you think arenas were a mistake? And what would you think about something being brought into the game, even though it's not going to fucking happen, I think?
It's hard to call arenas a mistake. It was definitely, the fact that they were kind of added after the game had already been balanced, that presented some problems. So I don't know if that would work. Like I mentioned, vanilla is pretty rock, paper, scissors. So in a 10 versus 10 scenario, like Warsaw Gulch, you have most of the classes represented. And so you can sort of manipulate the rock, paper, scissors to try and, have your players taking favorable fights. In a 3 versus 3 and certainly a 2 versus 2, what you would end up with is basically 1 or 2 team compositions that are the best, and that's just the way it would be. I know I played on the Phoenix private servers for years when the scene was really small before Nestarius came out, and there were a ton of 2v2 tournaments, and Warlock Rogue won every single time. Every single one of them, it was Warlock Rogue that won. So, in order to make, slower paced team comps or, different compositions viable in a vanilla, 3 versus 3, you'd have to change stuff. And it's just, that's a road I don't want to go down. So I think, it could be fun, but 3 versus 3 in vanilla would be extraordinarily imbalanced. And I think you would pretty much wind up with a situation where you saw like 3 or 4 classes represented, and that was pretty much it. Like, for example, there would be absolutely no reason to bring a druid into a 3v3 arena in vanilla. There would be no reason. No one would ever play with a druid because they make unbelievable flag carriers. But, that's about it. Paladins and priests are better healers. Shamans are better utility. All 3 of those classes, can provide more, general support. All druids can really do is stay alive and get away and live forever. So with 3v3 vanilla, you would see some classes just, not even represented, and I don't think it would work.
Okay, well, my follow-up question from what you've just said would be, in that hypothetical world that won't happen, let's still do it for a bit of fun. If you were to put together your dream team for 3v3 Classic WoW arena play, what would it be?
Probably Mage, Warrior, Paladin, because Warriors have consistent massive damage. They have a basically unlimited resource in Rage. Warrior's not going to go Mages have by far the best control in the game, and Paladins are just the best healers in my opinion. They have so much utility and so many kind of oh shit buttons to get out of tight situations. So without really thinking about it a whole lot, just off the top of my head, I'd probably say Paladin, Mage, Warrior.
Okay, I was a little bit shocked to hear the Paladin inclusion, and the only reason is this. Sorry, I haven't told you this, but listeners of the show will know that I am not a PvPer. I've done no PvP. Well, sorry, that's not true. I dabbled in PvP back in the vanilla days, and when I say dabbled, I mean 1 or 2 battlegrounds a week. I wasn't a big PvP guy, but I do plan on turning that around for Classic. I really want to get involved. But the one thing that I have come across in terms of trawling through the forums for the show on a weekly basis is that despite the fact that you get the premise that, play any class you want, they're all good for PvP, everyone has their utility, I do still trip upon, Paladins maybe not so much. And I guess the reason for that is more maybe from a one-on-one aspect. I hear a lot, oh God, anyone can burn down a Paladin one-on-one. And I always thought, that's a little bit funny. What are your thoughts on the plight of the Paladin in vanilla PvP?
My thoughts are that the plight does not exist.
Okay. So we can dispel that misconception.
Paladins are absolutely insane, man. Paladins are insane. You're never going to kill anything 1v1 as a Paladin unless you're just like cheese wreck bomb spec, and the person you're fighting is dumb and gives you a full Rex deck. But as healers and as support, Paladins are absolutely unbelievable. Hand of Freedom is a completely insane ability. Blessing of Protection is a completely insane ability, immune to melee damage for a short period of time. Lay on Hands is an insane ability. Bubble obviously just is 10 seconds of free casting. They're just so good. They bring so much utility to the table. That being said, Priest is definitely the most versatile healer, mainly because Priest is the only class that has offensive and defensive dispels. So Paladins can cleanse, they can dispel their teammates, and Shamans can purge, they can dispel their enemies, but Priests can do both. So Priests bring a ton of value, and thinking back on that 3v3, in a lot of situations, I'd probably rather have a Priest than a Paladin. But in Battlegrounds, Paladins are nuts. A Paladin Warrior combo is one of the hardest things in the game to take out, because Paladins just have so many ways of buying themselves time and being unkillable while they continue to heal their warrior. So Paladins are nuts, man. They're nuts.
Moving on to a field that you have a little bit of experience in, and we've talked about obviously not only your experience with eSports, but you've also dabbled in casting a bit as well, haven't you?
Yeah, more recently, it's sort of been the past I guess 3 or 4 months that I've really started to get that off the ground. But I've been looking into it and thinking about it for probably a year or two.
Okay, so I'll read you out this post and have a follow-up question from user Saria again at the WoW official forums, who says this, and this is more in terms of touching on the way in which we might produce and cast vanilla WoW as an esport if it were to happen. And they say this: I think that there is some potential just in the way that the content is produced, camera perspective and point of view modes and whatnot. I think it would be fun to watch from a closer, if not all the way to first person view of the PvPers. I find it interesting to watch because I play the game and understand what's going on, whereas something like League of Legends is easy enough to watch and enjoy even though I don't play. I did enjoy the Mythic Plus races that they had recently, blah, blah, blah. So my question to you would be this: in terms of the production of a vanilla WoW esport event, how do you think it should be presented to viewers in terms of camera perspectives? What classes would you, I know it's hard to say, but what classes would you think you'd prefer to focus on in terms of being a bit more action heavy or fun to commentate on? What do you think?
So it would totally depend on what was happening at any given time. I don't want to talk too much about Counter-Strike because I know most of the listeners don't care about Counter-Strike, but there are actually people in the Counter-Strike scene called observers, and there are some people that are very, very good at observing and literally make a living observing. And observing just refers to controlling the camera. So there's a player actually in the server spectating the game. And they have a shitload of keybinds and stuff to let them switch to anybody's perspective at a given moment, or to go third person, or they can even hit a button and follow a grenade as it sails through the air, so you can see stuff like that. Vanilla with something like that, but on a much simpler level, would be extraordinarily fun to watch. For example, let's say the druid takes the flag, and he's got a warlock and a rogue on defense that he's trying to escape from. At that time, throw on that druid's point of view and watch this guy, put on a show of mechanical skill as he tries to outplay two people and get the flag out. If conversely, let's say there's a big team fight happening. Let's say the enemy flag is safe on the roof of the base and both teams are waiting to cap, and the offensive waves are kind of moving in. In that scenario, hop on the warrior's point of view. Let's watch this warrior charge into this team fight and start wrecking shit. Let's say there's a rogue. Let's say the rogue has made a really, really nice lurk play, and the enemy flag carrier used all of his cooldowns and lost some HP running through the mid fight, but the rogue has made a perfect lurk, and he's just waiting in the enemy tunnel to jump that druid. Hop on his point of view and watch that. Like I said, with Warsong Gulch, there are usually only 1 or 2 meaningful battles happening. And so if you hop on board with the point of view of whatever class is going to have a big impact in that battle, it would be extraordinarily fun to watch. And then, when you have a 10 versus 10 mid brawl or something like that, you could certainly zoom out into third person, and it would be really cool to see. But I think as far as showcasing skill, a first person perspective would definitely be the best, because you can see how that player is prioritizing their globals.
All right. Now, that's kind of a pretty good overview of what might come with Vanilla WoW if it were to sort of blossom as an esport. And I think, is it fair to say that, as you sort of clarified through the interview, that your position is basically you are very skeptical of Classic WoW's potential as an esport. However, as a fan, you are very hopeful.
Yeah, I would say as someone trying to get into the esports industry, I can't really call myself a professional yet. But as somebody that, takes it very seriously, I have a lot of skepticism, a lot of reservations. As a WoW nerd, I'm all about it. I can't wait. It sounds awesome. So one thing I actually haven't touched on yet that I think would be the main hindrance is that even if all this happens and Warsong Gulch is played competitively in Vanilla WoW, there's an expiration date because the meta can't be changed by Blizzard without screwing up the game. So you mentioned earlier, post you were reading about how in order for a game to be balanced competitively, homogenization has to occur. The best counter argument to that point is League of Legends and Dota. The League of Legends and Dota are the farthest thing from homogenized. Every single hero in the game has a very, very distinct role and identity and things that they can do well and things that they cannot do at all. And it's all about, balancing, what the abilities of the heroes on your team versus the heroes on the other team. So the reason that works for those games is two reasons. Number one is just that there's an insane amount of heroes. There are, hundreds. And number two is that the game is constantly tweaked by Riot or by Valve. With vanilla, after, a year, 2 years, 3 years, people at the top level, would have pretty much figured out exactly what works the best, and it would get very, very stale. The only way to combat that staleness is balance changes and changes to the classes, which you start doing that and you're screwing up vanilla. A really good example of what I'm talking about is going back to Overwatch. The first couple of years of, the big competitive Overwatch scene, there was pretty much one team composition called Dive Comp. And I'm not an expert in Overwatch by any means, but I know that everyone played Dive Comp. And I know that Blizzard actually introduced a new hero to Overwatch called Brigitte a few months ago. And Brigitte was literally built from the ground up to counter Dive Comp. So basically Blizzard saw, okay, the professional players have all figured out the best strategy. They're all using this strategy. It's getting stale. It's getting boring. Let's throw a wrench in the gears by creating a hero that completely dismantles that strategy. So, the same thing would kind of happen with vanilla. Any game that is being played by professionals at a high level, eventually they're going to figure out what's best. And once it starts to get stale, you have to make balance changes. And so I really think with vanilla esports, there would sort of be an expiration date. It would sort of reach the point where the meta is not going to change because we don't want our, beloved vanilla to be touched or changed at all. And so you'd hit a point where it got a bit stale. I think maybe for 1 or 2 years after Classic came out, it could be really fucking cool, but there would definitely sort of be an expiration date.
All right, OhhGee, just for a little bit of fun, if you will indulge me, just before we move on to the next topic, I wanted to try and give you a chance. You said you're a bit of an amateur caster and you like to sort of try your hand at commentating. I've sent you a link for a vanilla PvP fight between a mage and a warrior, and there's a rogue in the mix as well off on the periphery. But if you could just sort of, for shits and giggles, commentate this tight 30-second fight for us and see how you go. So I'll put the link in the podcast description so everyone can watch along, but how about go for it?
All right, so we've got LOL WTF here. He's on this rogue. He's doing a good job of keeping rank 1 frost bolts up, keeping the rogue in combat with Scorch. A nice counterspell on the warrior there is going to prevent a charge right as the rogue vanishes, and he will get him out. So that's a lot of cooldowns burned. Warrior has intercepted. He has no way to close this distance, and the rogue is going to go down. So if this warrior can now be kept slowed and kept in combat, this is really LOL's fight to lose. Doing a great job of 5/8 kiting here, staying out of that intercept range, but also out of melee range. And a nice Frostbite proc there is just going to win him this fight right away. Didn't even need to use the Nova.
Well done. Excellent. It's like a tight horse race. I love it.
Yeah.
now that we've kind of done the esports thing, I just want to change tact a little bit now to general PvP. And you've got a lot of experience in vanilla PvP, and just get your thought on the state of the nation, if you will, in terms of vanilla PvP. And you just talked about, again, concepts that we've touched on a few times in terms of homogenization and class balancing. In your view, and you mentioned that the great example in terms of, characters literally being made to counter others because some might be OP, things like that, or having no counter. In vanilla World of Warcraft, if you were to be given the keys to the car and I said to you, all right, you can fix the most broken classes in PvP, where would you be looking at?
If I could change a vanilla class?
Yeah, who's the most fucked in vanilla PvP?
In terms of like being overpowered or being useless?
Just in terms of, I guess no one's really useless, but you might not be as, how do I put this? Ready to go toe to toe with everyone else in the battleground with the tools in your tool belt.
It's hard to say, because part of what I really love about vanilla is engineering and potions and gadgets. They sort of do homogenize the game a bit. So classes that lack, certain abilities can often make up for their shortcomings with potions and engineering items. For example, everyone here has probably seen my good friend Billy Boy's Warlock videos. He played as Goth and Dashishka. So everybody's seen Goth 2, one of the best vanilla PvP movies ever made. I've known that guy for 5 or 6 years, really good friend of mine. But anyway, he is famous for his use of living action potions. Living action potions don't actually come out until ZG, so you can't get them on Northdale right now. But living action potion actually removes a stun. So a free action potion prevents you from being stunned, but it won't remove a stun that's currently on you. Living action potions remove a current stun. So the reason I'm saying all this is the Warlock PvP trinket does not remove stuns. So stuns are kind of the bane of a Warlock. If a rogue can kill a Warlock from 100 to 0 before the Warlock can even move, because he has no way to get out of stuns. So Goth, he runs around with a bunch of living action potions, and it allows him to play his class in a completely different way than he could without, those potions. When a rogue kidney shots him, he can living action potion it, and death coil or whatever, and that guy's, well, he just lost the fight right there. So I am really hesitant to talk about any changes I would want, because one of my favorite things about vanilla is the fact that you have to discover the extra shit to sort of make up for the shortcomings of your class. And that's one of my favorite characteristics of the game. That being said, druids don't really have a spec that allows them to do consistent damage. So I guess one thing I might look at would be giving druids a way to deal damage. I don't know, man. It's hard to say. I love everything about vanilla too much to want to change anything.
No, I completely understand. But you touched on a couple of things there that I'd love to explore a little bit more. And you just brought up the topic of kind of, extra things that we can get in order to make up for our shortcomings. And you've brought out a couple of, videos. You've talked about trinkets on your YouTube channel. You've talked about, proper grenade use and things like that, which I actually found really interesting, because I didn't know that. A lot of people obviously did know it, but, I think there's a fair few, just as many people who didn't know the mechanics behind grenade use. And I found that video really, really educational for me. But building on from that, and it might be videos that you've got planned in the future. We've all seen the videos about Skull of Impending Doom and blah, blah, blah. What, outside of sort of the ones that we always talk about, what other kind of trinkets, items, things like that are vanilla, classic WoW PvP players going to be leaning on that the average player might not be aware of?
I would say the most important are probably your reflectors, your fire reflector, frost reflector, shadow reflector. They're insanely good. Those items are actually less useful against really good players, because a really good player will always cancel their cast when they see the animation. But if you're just like running around the world or running around the typical battleground, you can absolutely own people with reflectors, and it's so much fun. So those reflectors are probably the coolest and some of the most useful items. Skull of Impending Doom is obviously huge. Being able to, break yourself out of CC with that. Sorry if you hear my dog. He's getting antsy.
It's all good. He loves PvP.
Yeah, right. Being able to break yourself out of CC with that's unbelievable. Furbolg Medicine Pouch is an absolutely insane item. It's an offhand. You get it from a vendor in Felwood. You have to farm. I think it's revered with these Furbolgs, and you can buy it. And it heals you for about 1,000 over time. So that's a crazy item. 1,000 self heal. No classes in vanilla have 1,000 HP self heal. So that's really good. Grenades are obviously huge. Mentioned reflectors. The Gnomish net is a mixed bag. It tends to backfire a lot. And it backfires more on some servers than others. When I say backfire, I mean it traps you instead of trapping your enemy. Then you have the helmets. The Goblin Rocket Helm and the Gnomish Mind Control Cap are both massive. Rocket Helm is the most overpowered CC in the game. It's instant cast, and it CCs people for up to 30 seconds. On most servers, it's at least 10 or 12 seconds, usually closer to 15. So Rocket Helm is a very long CC that nobody can trinket. That is huge. If you can, like as a rogue, if you're looking at like a druid flag carrier, a priest, and a warlock, if you sap the warlock and Rocket Helm the priest, you have like 12 or 13 seconds to just 1v1 that druid. So the control from Rocket Helm is huge. Mind Control Cap, similarly, can be used for control, but it's obviously a lot more fun because you can mess with people. One of my favorite pastimes is mind controlling people and walking them out of the battleground portal so they get a 15-minute deserter. That's always fun.
Now, some great, obviously, pieces of gear that you've just gone through there. You touched very briefly on a couple of pots that people might want to look towards. Are there any kind of other pots that people should be farming or highlighting on the auction house and hunting down before jumping into battlegrounds in vanilla?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually one more sort of gadget item that most people probably know about is Title Charm. It's extremely difficult to obtain. It comes from one mob that is pretty much camped 24/7, and it's a long respawn timer. So it's really hard to get a hold of Title Charm, but it's an insane item. It's a 3-second stun, I think, with a 30-yard range. Instant cast, absolutely nuts because, again, most classes in vanilla don't have a stun. So Title Charm's insane. As for potions, I talked about living action potions. Those are amazing for warlocks, amazing for any class that struggles with not having a way to get out of stuns. Free action potions are amazing for warriors, especially horde warriors, because they don't have freedom. And another reason that free action potions are very, very powerful, specifically for horde players, is because the only alliance class that can dispel that FAP is a priest or a warlock fellhunter pet. When you're alliance and you are popping potions in a battleground, you're going to get them dispelled a lot more often because shamans and priests can dispel that potion, can remove it. But paladins are not able to remove potions from enemies. So stuff like free action potions become a lot more powerful on the horde side. Let's say you're playing horde and the alliance team that you're up against has 2 paladins and a priest as the healers. If you can neutralize that priest or CC him, your warriors can pop FAPs and nobody can dispel them, and your warriors can just absolutely run around doing whatever they want. So FAPs are huge for warriors, especially horde. Limited Invulnerability Potion is my favorite as a mage. Really, really cool item. It works basically like a bop. You're immune to melee damage for, I think, 5 or 6 seconds. Super, super cool. Like if you blink and then a second rogue opens on you or something like that. Limited vulnerability potions can, allow you to get a few globals off, and be untouchable. So those are probably the best 3 potions: limited invulnerability, living action, and free action. And depending on which class you are, you're gonna find some more useful than others. For example, living action potions are not very useful as a mage because I have blink on a 14-second cooldown, 15, and I have 2 ice blocks. So I have a bunch of ways to get out of stuns, and I'm much better off using that potion cooldown on a limited invulnerability than a living action. If I was a warlock, I'd want I need to save that potion cooldown for living action. So that's another thing. All the potions share cooldowns, and a lot of times you'll see more casual players like use health potions more than anything else, and that's just not good. You want to use that potion cooldown on something that is going to let you make a play. As far as others, I might be speaking the name wrong. I want to say it's because it's a weird name. I think it's Elixir of Poison Resistance. I think it's Elixir of Poison Resistance is what it's called, but it removes poisons. So that's a great item. It removes Viper Sting. If you're a mana user and you're getting Viper Stung by hunters, you can use that. You can use it, to take off crippling poison. If you're trying to get away from a rogue, it'll take off the crit poison. And then there is, of course, Restorative Potion. Restorative potions are really interesting with the way that they work because it puts, I believe, a 30-second buff on you. And what it does is every few seconds it ticks. And every time it ticks, it removes a magic effect from you. So Resto Pots are nuts. They're so good for rogues. They remove Fairy Fire. So, when you're a rogue and a druid puts Fairy Fire on you, to quote Perplexity, you basically can't play your class for a minute. So a Resto Pot in that situation is huge. If you're fighting, dot classes, throw up a Resto Pot and, the Warlock will have to keep refreshing his dots and won't really be doing a lot of damage with dots. So Resto Pot's very good as well. Those are the main ones you're going to use a lot. Swiftness potions, if you're a flag carrier especially, are very good, and they're actually super cheap. So yeah, that pretty much covers the main ones you're going to want to use.
No, that was an amazing response. Thank you so much for that.
Forgive me if I go on too long, man.
No,
I'm a talker, as you can tell, and I get really excited about this stuff. So
believe me, that was a bomb of knowledge, and I don't think anyone's going to be complaining about that. So thank you so much. Feel free to go on. But one thing I'm going to pick up on, and my listeners know that I'm a total noob, and I'm allowed one stupid question every interview, and maybe I've already asked a stupid question, but here's the really stupid question. Now, we talked about how, Skull of Impending Doom. Everyone talks about it. Everyone goes on about how amazing it is. I hadn't really looked into the item that much. I just hear the name come up all the time. But I sort of just looked into it while you were talking then, because you mentioned that, I think you said that it breaks CC. And I looked it up on the Classic database, and the item's description, please tell me if I'm saying anything wrong, is Skull of Impending Doom, held in offhand, +7 intellect, increases your run speed by 60% for 10 seconds, deals 100 to 501 damage, and drains 100 to 501 mana every 2 seconds with a 5-minute cooldown. I didn't know that it broke CC. I know nothing about the item. So explain, basically, the question is, why is Skull of Impending Doom sort of the greatest thing since sliced bread? And are you a fool if you go into any battleground without Skull of Impending Doom?
It's a pretty damn good item. And if you're trying to take the game seriously, you definitely need to have it. When I was ranking on Chronos 2, I was getting really, really frustrated one day because every time we got in a fight, our priests were just sheeped the whole fight. And I was getting so frustrated. I was like, how are you guys just always CC'd? And so after the match, I said, okay, put a 1 in raid chat if you have Skull of Impending Doom keybound. And there were like 2 or 3 people out of my 10-man pre-made that had it. And I stopped. I said, okay, we're not queuing until everyone has this item. And we stopped pre-mating in the middle of prime time. And I spent an hour running the entire pre-made through the quest chain because the item is that good. The way that breaks CC is with the damage. So when that damage ticks on you, it'll break you out of a polymorph. It'll break you out of a blind. It'll break you out of a warlock, seduce. It'll break you out of a rocket helm. It'll break you out of a sap. Probably some other stuff that I'm not thinking about. So, like a super easy way to practice using Skull is on polymorph because it has a cast time. So if you're wearing a Skull and a mage starts to cast a polymorph on you, you can hit your Skull keybind and he'll sheep you. But then as soon as that damage ticks, it'll break you out of the sheep. And he can try to sheep you again, but the next damage tick is going to break you out again. And it's actually hilarious because really bad mages will just keep spamming sheep and it'll be DR'd and you'll be immune to it after 3. So it's really good. Obviously breaking out of a blind, that's different because that doesn't have a cast time, so you have to predict it. So a lot of times you'll see the best players sort of predict when a rogue is going to blind them or when the rogue needs to blind them. and pop a skull real quick. And so if the rogue, throws his blind into a skull, that all you need is one tick to break you out of that blind, and that's a cooldown. So as soon as it breaks, you can actually remove the debuff from yourself and not take any more damage. You just need that one tick to get you out of the blind. So it's a pretty high skill cap item, I guess you could say. It lets you do some amazing stuff, but it is risky in some ways because it does damage you. So against a good player, when you use your skull, they're probably going to try and stun you or net you or do something that takes away your mobility and forces you to keep eating the damage. But if you can get a feel for predicting people, it's such an insane item. And predicting is a huge part of vanilla PvP. A lot of times people see like really sick plays and they think that it was like a reaction time thing, but it's almost always, when you see people like vanish a death coil or like, ice block a death coil really close and stuff like that, it's usually more of a prediction than it is a reaction. So it's extremely important to sort of try and envision the future of a fight, like try and think what the next, 5 seconds of this fight are going to look like. And if once you get really good at that, if you see your opponent blinding or sheeping or whatever in the next few seconds, you just pop that skull. So it's an insane item for that reason.
It's a funny little window into, I guess, the mind of the very average player like myself, because it seems so simple now that you've explained that. And as soon as you said, well, damage ticks and that breaks EC, the light bulb goes over my head and I go, oh, of course, that's why it's good. But it just shows a little difference between, and I know it's not exactly rocket science to figure that out, that damage, breaks CC, but average players like me and new players to WoW Classic when it comes out will simply read the item text and just go, I guess it just makes you run faster and does a bit of damage or whatever. We don't put 2 and 2 together, even though we know that 2 and 2 equals 4, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. That's part of what I love about Vanilla Man is that it's simple on the surface. It's deceptively simple on the surface. And if you want to really discover all of the tools in PvP, you've got to spend a lot of time with the game, and you've got to watch good players, and you've got to figure out go to your combat log, what the hell did that guy just do? I'll never forget the first time that somebody used the Skull of Impending Doom on me. It was a warlock named Sush on Phoenix Emerald Dream, like 2012, 2013, back in the day. And I was playing a rogue and I blinded into his skull and he broke out of it. And like, I was like, what? Like, what did I just blinded him. What did he just do? Why is he not blinded? And I like took my hands off the keyboard and it just died. And I was just like staring at the screen with my mouth hanging open. Like, what the fuck did that guy just do? And he used the Skull of Impending Doom, so I talked to him, dude, what the hell did you just do? Skull of Impending Doom, went and did the quest chain, started figuring out how to use it. So that's part of the beauty of vanilla is even if you're mechanically, like if you're a very mechanically skilled player, you could be somebody that's gotten Gladiator 10 times and vanilla is still going to have a learning curve for you because you're going to have to, compartmentalize all of these extra gadgets and abilities and potions and whatnot. So yeah, you could be a WoW god, and a, amazing arena player, but vanilla will still have a learning curve because of all the stuff that you have to think about.
You mentioned something in your previous answer that I was really intrigued by and something that I've really come to respect in terms of the PvP area of the game. And you mentioned that skilled players obviously are looking a little bit in the future. They're anticipating what's coming in the next 5 seconds of the fight. And something that I enjoy in seeing in YouTube videos is when people lose their mind over great plays in terms of, faking someone out or things like that. Now, my first question down this angle would be, what in your mind are some of the most important abilities to try to anticipate in classic World of Warcraft?
Death Coil from Warlocks, Blind from Rogues, Vanish from Rogues, Trinkets from Warriors. There's a lot of other stuff like situationally, like for example, with druids, a druid flag carrier will, when he takes the flag, if they're, like let's say a druid takes the flag and there's a few defenders in the base, he's got like, there's a fight going on in the base when he takes the flag. as soon as that druid picks a flag, if he's good, his priority is getting outside where he can get in travel form. And so what he'll do, if he's a good druid, is he'll pick the flag, he'll go bear form, and then his first priority will be feral charging somebody that's near a doorway. So, that's like a really specific situational thing. But when that druid takes the flag, like if you're near a doorway, get away. Or like when you see the druid about to pick the flag, move away from the doorway, because you know that as soon as he picks it, if you're by the doorway, he's going to charge you, he's going to pop out the door, go travel for him, and be gone. So that's just a really specific example to kind of show you how there are way too many situations you need to predict for me to ever cover. But in terms of the basic stuff, I would say Death Coil, Blind, Vanish are three good examples. So with a Death Coil, the most important thing to note is that a Warlock has to be facing you to Death Coil you. He can cast Fear on you, not facing you. He can throw dots on you, not facing you. He can be running away from you and still use most of his abilities not facing you. But he's got to face you to coil you. So if a Warlock is running away from you and you have the pressure and he's defensive and he like jumps up in the air and spins around towards you, he's going to coil. And you can read his movement to know that he's going to coil. A lot of times, once you get good at reading people's movement, their movement will sort of tell you what ability they want to use, if that makes sense. There's actually an absolutely insane clip of a duel between Goth and Perplexity, where Goth is running from him and he jumps and spins around literally as like a fake death coil to make Perplexity pop his Shadow Reflector and vanish. But he doesn't actually death coil. He just like spins around to make him think he's about to death coil. So there are just so many layers to the mind games, when it's two really good players against each other. But yeah, locks facing you to coil is big. For blind, it can be a little harder to predict because all of a rogue's abilities require him to be in melee range. So it's harder to read a rogue's movement because he's pretty much always going to be running towards you. However, if you have a ton of pressure and you know that he needs to reset the fight and he's running at you, he's probably going to blind you. Or like if you get a slow on the rogue and he's slowed and you're not, and you're starting to create distance and he needs to keep you close to him, that's another situation where he's probably going to blind you. If you like a flag carrier situation, if you've popped a bunch of speeds and stuff and taken the flag, and the rogue is out of stealth, he's probably going to blind you. So blind is a big one. And then vanish is super basic. People have been, even average players have been predicting vanish since the dawn of time. When I have a rogue in a Frost Nova and I know that he has vanish on cooldown, what I'll usually do is have my finger right over my rank 1 Blizzard key so that as soon as he vanishes, I just drop a rank 1 Blizzard and pop him out. Or even better, a lot of times I'll throw a grenade right on top of that Frost Nova, because when you do that, the rogue will actually vanish the Frost Nova. But if your grenade is already in the air by the time he vanishes, then when your nade hits, it's going to pull him back out of stealth. So yeah, looking at people's movement is really important to sort of decide, what is this guy trying to do? What's his goal? What does he need to do here? And even outside of movement, you can sometimes make these assumptions just based on class mechanics. For example, hunters. Hunters are pretty much going to win versus any class 1v1 if the fight happens at long range on the hunter's terms and he doesn't make any mistakes kiting. However, a hunter is almost always going to lose to pretty much any class if that class gets the jump on him and is able to make the whole fight happen in the hunter's dead zone. So when a hunter feigns death, he's going to drop a trap because he's got to be out of combat. So when you see a hunter like feign death and kneel down, he's dropping a trap. Another sort of aspect to that is, I'll use the example of rogue versus hunter. Hunters are one of the classes that can trinket stunts. So when you're a rogue fighting a hunter, this is 90% of the time how the beginning of the fight will play out. You get the opener, you get your cheap shot, and then if he doesn't trinket your cheap shot, he's going to trinket when you kidney shot. And as soon as that hunter trinkets, the first thing he's going to do is scatter shot you, and then he's going to feign death and drop a trap so that he can run away and create distance. So Skull of Impending Doom breaks scattershot and also breaks the hunter trap. So when you're a rogue and you see that hunter trinket, as soon as he pops his trinket, just have your finger on your skull key. And if you get that skull off, in between his trinket and his scatter shot, you've ruined his play. If he doesn't seem to be trinketing, then you just need to know as soon as your kidney shot expires, he's going to scatter shot you. So a lot of times you can sort of I ask myself all the time, what button is my opponent spamming right now? That's super important to go through that thought process. So if I'm a rogue and I've got a hunter in a stun lock, he's spamming scattershot 100% of the time. That's what he's doing, period. And so as soon as those stuns expire, he's going to try to scattershot me. And if I can get my skull popped ahead of that, I ruin his play. So that's, I would say, a really big tip in terms of predicting is when you're in the middle of a fight, just sort of ask yourself, like, what if I was playing this class that I'm fighting against, what button would I be spamming right now? What would I be doing? So
you're doing so incredibly well, and unfortunately, I think I've got the question now that's going to break you, because here's a very, very silly thing for me. You know how I said to you that I'm allowed one stupid question per interview?
Yeah.
Well, it's about to be two. So here's a weird thing that I've always wondered that literally everyone listening to this will know the answer to except for me. So this is a personal question. You talked about warlocks jumping and turning and either popping off a death coil or faking popping off a death coil. Why the fuck does everyone jump so often in PvP and in games in general in esports? Why is jumping happening all the time, and why am I an idiot, maybe not so, for being the only person who doesn't jump?
Well, I mean, in shooters, there are a variety of reasons people would jump. Most of the time, it's just because it makes it a lot harder to headshot you. You know, if you're bunny hopping and bouncing around, then it's a lot more difficult for somebody to line up a headshot on you because the level of your head is constantly changing. In Halo 2, there was a trick called Gandhi hopping, where you would actually jump and then you would spam crouch while you're in the air, and it would make your head like bob up and down very rapidly, and it made you basically impossible to headshot. So in shooters, I would say usually that's why. In WoW, jumping is good because it lets you not lose momentum, like when you're casting, no matter what your keybinds are. So like if I'm like running, you never want to backpedal. You should just unbind your backpedal key, unbind S, and put it on a spell. It's one of the best buttons on your keyboard, so use it for a spell, not backpedaling. So assuming that you're not backpedaling ever, if you're running from a rogue, you're probably going to be strafing, left or right. And if you need to turn and face him, like for example, I'm a mage. Let's say I'm running away from a rogue and I need to fire blast him. I've got to be facing him to fire blast him. So what I can do is I'm running, strafing, and then I can jump and I can turn to face him while I'm in the air and fire blast him, and then turn back, and I don't lose any momentum because I'm in the air while it's happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
If I stop to like face him, or like even, slightly change the direction that I'm moving to face him, then he'll catch up to me a little bit. But if I jump, turn, fire blast, turn back, he doesn't gain any ground on me at all. Yeah.
I'm sitting here and I feel like I should be writing these down. I'm like, unbind S and PvP equals player versus player. Like, I'm such a fucking noob when it comes to this stuff. But thanks so much for that explanation. Where I'll go from here is we've talked about plays, and you've given some great examples of counter plays or outplaying certain people. What are some of the most memorable plays that you've seen or come across in World of Warcraft?
One of my favorites from my stuff, I have a clip towards the end of my mage movie where I actually use a gnomish cloaking device on a cheap shot. So like, gnomish cloaking device is another engineering trinket that makes you invisible for 5 seconds. And I actually am sitting in a gouge, and the rogue, I guess he vanishes or re-stealth, so I know he's going to cheap shot me, and so I'm spamming that invisibility item, the cloaking device, and I get it off within a couple server ticks of his cheap shot, and so I actually eat the cheap shot and I get stunned, but I'm invisible while I'm stunned, and so then the cheap shot expires, I'm still invisible, and the rogue's just kind of standing there wondering what's happening. So that was one of the coolest things that I've personally done, because I remember I really freaked out when I did that, because I'd been I'd attempted it a few times, but you have to get it like within 5 or 10 server ticks of the cheap shot for it to work. So that was cool. The fake death coil that I mentioned earlier, is that one just blew my mind when I saw that. I went back and watched that a few times over. I mean, sculling blinds is always super satisfying. It's just a great feeling to, you know, predict the blind and skull it. Another cool thing that I've done in some 1vx fights is when you use a rocket helm, that engineering helmet that's the long CC. When you use that, it's instant cast, but you charge towards your target and you hit your target and stun them, and then it knocks you down for about 2 seconds. So when you use the rocket helm, it actually CCs you, knocks you down, and you can't do anything for about 2 seconds. So if you're in like a 1 versus 2 situation, and you rocket helm one of them, the second player is going to have 2 seconds to sort of do whatever he wants to you. And I actually figured out, I'm sure other people had done this before me, but I've never seen footage of anyone doing it before me. And I figured it out on my own, that a limited invulnerability potion would actually prevent me from being knocked down when I used a rocket helm. So that's another cool thing that I started doing, was if I was against, 2 or 3 melee and I knew that they would, totally melt me while I was sitting in that rocket helm knockdown, I would pop the invulnerability potion before I use the rocket helm. And so then I don't get knocked down, and I can just immediately start casting again. So that was another kind of cool trick that I really love that one, because it throws people for a loop.
You talked about coming across some plays on YouTube that blew your mind from other players. Who are some of the players that you look up to as PvP gods? And are there people that you recommend other players should go ahead and seek out on YouTube, or perhaps people that aren't on YouTube that are still somewhat known in the community? Who do you think are the creme de la creme of vanilla WoW PvP players?
Well, I mean, everybody, I'm sure that's listening to this has seen Perplexity's videos, and he's definitely the king of like coming up with new tricks. He's a really big dueler. Like he does a lot of 1v1 stuff. I'm more of a battlegrounds player, but some guys just spend hours and hours and hours just dueling each other and trying to figure out all kinds of new tricks. And Perplexity has some really, really impressive stuff in his videos. Almost anyone can watch those, and you're going to see something that blows your mind. Goth, I mentioned him earlier. He's a really good friend of mine. He doesn't play anymore, but he's got some really cool videos. He definitely pushes Warlock to the absolute limit. And he does stuff with engineering and potions that just make Warlock look like an absolute god class. So his stuff is insane. There's some other, stuff out there. I know Storm X has, I think, kind of recently started putting out a lot of videos. I was sort of away from the scene for about a year. When I came back, he had a ton of stuff on YouTube. And he's definitely got the highest level druid gameplay that I've seen footage of. He's really good with fakes, and his movement is beautiful. So watching a druid with good movement is really, really cool. Aside from that, I don't really know of anybody that's like unknown or like has low views that you could just look up a video of them. But obviously there are tons and tons of insane players out there that don't even necessarily stream or make videos or anything like that.
Another sort of tangent I want to go on here now, if it's okay with you, is just getting more to the battle. You said that you're more of a battlegrounds player. You're not much of a dueler. You prefer to be obviously in the thick of things, where all the action happens in terms of a battleground.
I enjoy dueling, as much as anyone else, but mostly what I mean is, while there are players that, will sit down and spend 10 hours just dueling each other, I'm a person that I'll sit down and I'll spend 10 hours like solo queuing battlegrounds, so.
Oh, I'm the same. I've done so few duels. I'm not into it. It's not really me. I much prefer to jump into a battleground. But when I do jump into those battlegrounds, the one thing I haven't really touched on the show yet is, we've lightly touched on it, but if we could get a bit more specific here, let's perhaps start with Warsong Gulch. Are there some, even though it doesn't really apply to Warsong Gulch as much, we'll go into more Arathi Basin soon, but are there any tips and tricks that you would say players should take in mind in terms of the geography or tactics with Warsong Gulch?
Well, with Warsong Gulch, the most important thing is being in the place on the map where your class is needed to have an impact at a given time. So the biggest thing that separates a really good Warsong Gulch pre-made from an average Warsong Gulch pre-made is that excuse me, is that in a really good Warsong Gulch pre-made, every single player is going to know exactly where they need to be, and they're going to get on their mount and they're going to go straight there. I've played with some pre-mades that were like this, and it was amazing because everyone had a really, really firm understanding of what their class's job was and where they needed to be on the map, at a given moment. I've also played in some pre-mades where, I felt like I had to micromanage, and I had to, open the map and say, okay, like, priest, you gotta go, you gotta get down there, dude. Like the warriors are down there ready to kill this guy and you're not with them. And so we got 30 seconds of downtime because you're not where you're supposed to be, and Warsong Gulch is basically a race. That's really all that it is. It's a race back and forth across the map. So like, for example, let's say the druids on both teams take the flags, mid-fight's happening, and both druids escape. And so, now you have a situation where each team has the enemy flag on their roof ready to cap. And now it's time to send offense, and one side or another is going to get a kill. It's a race. It's literally a race. And if your offense knows, okay, as soon as I get out of combat, I mount up and I haul ass and I go kill this druid, then you're going to win that race. If you have people kind of lingering around the mid fight, I'm going to clean up these kills. I'm going to go throw a slow on this guy. By the time all of your players get mounted up and get some mana and are ready to go on offense, your flag carrier is already going to be dead because it's a race. So I would say the main thing in Warsong Gulch is just, when you get out of combat, get on your mount and make a beeline to where your class should be. And there's no way to say where you should be because it depends on your class and it's situational. So you've got to learn it and get a feel for it. Res timing is also really important. So like, your pre-made should always communicate about what the res timer is. If the res is going off in 3 seconds and, you've got some players dying in a mid-fight, those players should click off their buffs and die as fast as possible to try and catch that res wave. If you saw if you know that a res wave just went off and you've got an enemy priest that's out of mana, you don't want to kill him. You just want to leave him sitting there out of mana in mid because, he's going to have to sit there and drink rather than getting killed and resing with full mana. So it's really in Warsong Gulch, it's about knowing when the res wave is going off, knowing, what state the game is in at that given moment, and where should you be, what should you be doing on your class.
I can assure you that things like knowledge of the res timer waves and communicating that to the team is, again, something that I had no fucking idea about. And that is, it might not be blowing anyone else's mind, but it's blowing mine, I can assure you. And there might be some people listening now who don't PvP a lot and go, holy shit, I never even considered that. That's an amazing thing to bring up. Moving on from Warsong Gulch, this is the one that really intrigues me. Now, my favorite battleground is Arathi Basin. One thing I've been trying to find online, which I actually struggle to find, and maybe you can help in this regard, is what kind of tactics would you recommend with Arathi Basin? Is there one definitive point that you're like, you want to go here first, or you definitely want to be holding this one? It has the greatest tactical advantage. What do you say people should take into mind when going through Arathi Basin?
Well, in Arathi Basin, it sort of depends on what type of match it is and what your goals are. So, for example, if you're in a ranking pre-made playing Arathi Basin and you're up against pugs, your goal should be to 5 cap. And so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have 4 players assigned to cap stables, blacksmith, lumber mill, and mine. And you're going to zerg through everything. And then your goal is getting to farm before Horde is able to cap farm. And if Horde does cap farm, then what you want to do is you want to send all your mages to the graveyard. You want to have your warriors and healers clear out all the Horde on the flag. And then when they get their res wave, you just have your mages like novaing them and slowing them down and keeping them trapped at the graveyard while you cap farm. So like if you're a pre-made smashing pugs, that's how you want to play. If you're in a pre-made versus pre-made match and it's going to be a competitive match, again, you've got to evaluate how good is your team, how good is the other team, what are your goals. Anytime you're playing in a pre-made and you're playing Arathi Basin and you get in a match against another pre-made, the first thing that happens is your leader or your leaders make a call. They say, okay, we know that we're a lot better than this team. We're going to forecap these guys, and we'll let them have farm, but we can forecap them. Or you might say, this is a good team. We have to show these guys a little bit of respect. So let's play for 3 bases, show them some respect. So there's a huge kind of sliding scale, and it's basically based on, how confident you are against your opponent. So let's say both teams are really, really good and are going to show each other, some respect. What you're usually going to see is Blacksmith is the best base. Lumbermill is the second best base. Mine kind of sucks, and Farm and Stables, are decent if you have Lumbermill and BS. So usually what you're going to see with two, really good teams that respect each other, you're going to see them prioritize Blacksmith and Lumbermill above everything else. A lot of people, including me, my favorite tactic is to just send like one guy to mine. I usually like to send a rogue solo to mine. And his job is basically just, trying to prevent mine from being capped or delay that cap as long as he can. But you want to send your mages to Blacksmith, you want to send your mages to Lumbermill. You want to send your warriors to Blacksmith. The idea being that mages can fight up there at LM, and then they can slow fall down to Blacksmith. If other classes are carrying Noggin Foggers, then they can slow fall as well, which any serious PvPer should be carrying Noggin Foggers. So Lumbermill is a very good base for that reason, the fact that you can slow fall down to Blacksmith. Blacksmith obviously super important because it's right there in the middle, and you can easily rotate to any other base. So yeah, in a game where the teams are respecting each other and it's serious, you're usually going to see Horde go for Lumbermill Blacksmith farm, and you're going to see Alliance go for Lumbermill Blacksmith stables. Mine is kind of like the consolation prize. If you get mine, that's great, but that usually just means you lost Lumbermill or Blacksmith. So typically, LM and BS are where you're going to see the really impactful and decisive fights at the beginning of the match. As the match plays out, there are just so many things that can happen. If you have a rogue that's really good at ninja capping, a rogue that knows how to CC and use everything can easily ninja cap on like 2 or 3 players. Arathi Basin is very dynamic, and there are tons of strategies. But yeah, getting those that sort of, people call it the golden triangle, Lumbermill, Blacksmith, and then either stables or farm. That enables you to have your mages and hunters play actually in the road, sort of in between 3 nodes that you have. So if your nodes are very spread out, like if you have stables, farm, and mine, that's not very good, because even though you have 3 bases, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to hold them because your rotation is so slow. You have so far to run between them. But if you have Blacksmith, Lumbermill, and stables, your hunters and your mages can sit right there in the road, and they can be wherever they're needed pretty quickly. And hunters and mages are also just amazing for controlling choke points. Like if you have a mage on each of the 2 bridges at Blacksmith, he can drop rank 1 blizzards and stuff and slow down a Blacksmith incoming by himself. He can delay 10 players for 15 seconds by himself if he's playing properly. So mages and hunters have the best, what I call area denial skills in the game. They're able to control areas, control choke points, slow people down. So having good mages and good hunters that know how to float in between your bases is super important.
Now, did you do much AV?
Alterac Valley?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've played definitely a lot of AV. On Nesaurius, AV actually released while I was mid-ranking. I was like rank 11 and going really hard when it came out. And so we actually played with a 40-man pre-made because there's a script in the game that lets you queue a raid group for Alterac Valley. There's not, like, you can't just click on a queue master and do it, but there's a script that lets you do it. It's not an exploit. It's part of the game. It's built into the game, but most private servers have it blocked, the script. So it was actually funny when Nesaurius came out, the script wasn't blocked. We ran a 40-man AV pre-made. We got exalted in like 6 hours, and then the admins reset us all to. They reset all our rep, and they banned Monkey News for being the raid leader.
Oh, how funny. All right, well, just quickly wrapping up, in terms of AV, Are there any kind of things that people should keep in mind that don't regularly get spoken about with Alterac Valley? I mean, everyone sort of knows that over time, AV did become somewhat of a Zerg fest in a way, and people sort of stopped doing what it was intended to be, so to speak. Yeah. Outside of sort of the Zerg fest, what kind of things should players keep in mind, or what kind of tactics would you say are not spoken about as often with Alterac Valley?
I mean, most stuff has been beaten to death. Obviously, the Horde backdoor is incredibly good. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a series of fairly difficult jumps that you can do to the southwest of the Alliance base that basically lets you bypass that long bridge into the Alliance base, and that bridge is what makes the Alliance base so overpowered. The Horde base doesn't have a real choke point. You can kind of have your players coming in from a lot of angles into the Horde base, but the Alliance base, the intention, with the way the battleground is designed, was for it to only be accessible on that bridge. That's pretty broken because that bridge can be held by like 2 or 3 mages and a paladin against 40 players, for a certain amount of time. You can at least hold that incoming back because that bridge is such a tight choke point. So the backdoor jump, it's really funny because it's one of those things where it was not intentional. So like technically it's an exploit for sure, but it's kind of a necessary exploit. And it's really kind of a good thing, I think, that it's there, because if that, if that backdoor jump was not there, it would just be so impossible for Horde to get into the Alliance base. So it's kind of funny because it's definitely was not intentional, but it really, I think, balances things a bit. You can't go too deep with strategy in Alterac Valley. If you're playing for honor and reputation, then I believe it's usually best to just Zerg the final boss. Different servers sometimes have sort of different honor values placed on like killing the lieutenants and stuff like that. So on some servers, it's worth it to like stop and kill Belinda, or whatever it might be. But you can't really dissect it too much. The backdoor jump's really the only kind of weird, little trick that I know of in AV.
All right, well, that's the meat of the interview done for now, OhhGee. And what we like to do here on Countdown to Classic is we like to have a little bit of fun. So now it's time for a little bit of anger management. So each episode on Countdown to Classic, I ask the interviewee what made them really angry about vanilla World of Warcraft. So, OhhGee, is there something about the game that really gave you the shits?
Dodging. Oh, dodging. I can feel my blood boiling right now just thinking about it. Q dodging. So, oh my god, Q dodging. So, Blizzard needs to come up with something to prevent this in Classic, because Q dodging just absolutely ruins the game. It ruins PvP. It ruins it for your entire server when you Q dodge. And I'll explain to you why. So what I'm talking about Q dodging is basically when a pre-made knows they can't beat an enemy pre-made, and so they avoid getting into games versus that enemy pre-made. And there are a lot of ways to do this, and I don't really want to go through all of them because the last thing I want to do is teach people how to dodge. But there are a lot of methods, and it's usually pretty easy if you're scummy enough to have 10 people that want to do it. And the reason it's so bad is because when you are, how do I say this? When 2 pre-mates get into a match against each other, it's usually a long match. It's going to be at least a 20-minute match. If they're both really good teams, it's probably going to be more like a 30 or 45-minute match. And during that time that those 2 pre-mates are against each other, solo queue players will be getting put into pug battlegrounds against other pugs that they can actually have fun in and enjoy. When pre-mates dodge each other, number one, it makes it so incredibly boring to rank because you're just farming pugs all day and you never get challenged by a good team. So it ruins the game for rankers because it just makes it an absolute bore. And it ruins the game for pug players too, because if the pre-mates are never fighting each other and never like locking in to these long matches against one another, Pug players are just going to get up against an enemy pre-made every single time they queue. So when people dodge, it makes ranking boring. It makes the game super cancer to play as a solo queue player, just trying to have fun. It's just in general fucking horrible and just completely ruins the PvP scene of a server. One server I ranked on, there were some guys that took this to like a fucking industrial level. And the last thing I want to do is like start a witch hunt or bash anybody, so I'm not going to say anybody's name. But this group of players, they were on my faction, and so this is what they were doing. They struggled to beat the Horde pre-made. To be fair, we also, we had trouble with the Horde pre-made, but, we were capable of beating them. And we would fight them really, really hard every time, using 50 gold worth of potions in a 45-minute game to try and win. And so what this other alliance team started doing is they would queue, they would get somebody from their guild to join as an 11th member in their Warsong Gulch pre-made, and they'd, remove a guy. So they'd queue up, and they'd have one player that was designated that was not ranking, was not PvPing, just a random guy from their guild, and they would queue up, and when they got a queue pop, that guy would join the battleground. So what you would have is you'd have one guy in a battleground against the Horde pre-made. That game has been opened. The Horde pre-made is in that game, and your one player is in that game. And what they would do is then they would kick that guy out of the group. They would invite a new 10th player. They would re-queue, and they would get an instant pop, but it wouldn't dump them into the game against the Horde pre-made because that one player they sent in was occupying a spot, and they've invited a new 10th to their group. So you can't have 11 players in a war song, and so what does it do? It opens up a fresh game. They then join that game, and they're fighting pugs. And they did this on such an industrial level that literally every single time my group would queue, we would get put into a game against the Horde pre-made where they had already capped the flag, and it was horrible. And people should not have the ability to do that. Like I said, it ruins the game for absolutely everyone. So queue dodging makes my fucking blood boil. That sets me off, and there's got to be a solution for that before Classic comes out.
All right, very good. Now, that wasn't the only sort of instance of rage that I came across with regards to you and your gameplay. I'll just play you a short clip, and please do tell me if you can hear this. I hope it comes through. Just give me 1 second.
Nobody
fucked us now. They know we're here. No, they know we're here because you fucking went in before I called and they're turning around, man.
We need to go now.
Say 100 times, man. Go in. Pop Swiftest pots, go in. Just go in. We're already fucked. Just go in. God fucking damn it, man. Fucking listen.
You're aware of that clip, is that right?
Yeah, of course.
And looking back on it now, what can you tell us?
Not my finest moment, but I definitely laugh at that now. Like, it's been a couple of years, and I find it pretty funny now. But yeah, so what was happening there is I had taken my free-mate in my guild, and we were trying to wipe another guild that we knew was coming to raid. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to camp at the entrance to Blackrock Mountain, and wipe them out when they came in to raid. This is, past couple years doing this has become pretty common, ganking guilds. Sort of made famous by the Nope boys on Nostarius, and it's really taken off, and a lot of people do it now. So we were trying to do that, and the main thing that enables you to make that gank, like to gank an entire guild like that, is, number one, you have to have the element of surprise, and number two, you've got to catch them in a choke point when they're grouped up really tightly. Because the meta for guild versus guild PvP is, at least, on the alliance side where I was doing it, the plan was just you assign your paladins to each freedom a warrior and bump a mage, and then all your healers just spam heal warriors and mages. Other people don't matter. And if you do that properly, warriors and mages can pretty much take out that raid in like 2 or 3 seconds flat, especially if they're using sapper chargers and stuff. So the idea is for it to be a really, really clean, crisp, just boom, AoE, everybody down at once, dead in 5 seconds. What happened in that clip was I said like 10 or 20 times, I made it really clear that nobody should pop out from behind the wall until I made a call. I said, wait for my call. Don't pop out and attack anything until I make the call. And so what happens there is there's the Horde guild is coming down the hallway, and there's one guy that's like way ahead of the rest of them. This random druid is just way ahead of the rest of them. And when he comes around the corner, like a few of our players like jump this druid. And by doing that, they basically alerted the Horde raid to the fact that we were there. When you see a rank 14 warrior charge out from behind the wall and jump this druid, you're kind of gonna be like, whoa, something's up here. So like a couple guys jumped out way too early to kill this druid that, it kind of ruined the gank, because then the Horde guild's like, oh shit, they're here, turn around. So it's just, I raged so hard because I literally said 20 times, don't show yourself until I make a call. And then it's just, what happens? Yeah. So definitely not my finest moment. I will say ranking is absolutely exhausting, like mentally and physically. You sort of lose your mind a little bit. And, so that clip was recorded when I was under like severe sleep deprivation and a lot of stress. So definitely not my finest moment, but years later, I laugh at it.
Fair enough. All right. With all that anger out of the way, now it's time for Memory Lane. Each episode, I ask the interviewee to recount one of their fondest or funniest memories from in the vanilla World of Warcraft days. So, OhhGee, what would be your submission for Memory Lane?
Specifically vanilla or just WoW in general?
Let's say WoW in general.
All right. So one of the most fond memories that I have, one of the first really fond memories I have is in Burning Crusade. I rolled with a group of guys on my server that, to put it bluntly, we griefed people. We basically took great joy in PvPing and killing people that, were trying to farm stuff or whatever. And so when flying mounts first came out, if you died on your flying mount while you were up in the air, your corpse would actually stay up in the air, floating in the air. And so what we would do is we would take like a few Palm Pyro mages, and we would fly around Nagrand, and we would find people that were like hovering on their mounts in Nagrand or wherever, and we would like all slow fall and nuke them in the air. And because they died in the air, they would have to spirit res. They would have to take res sickness. And we called it bumming. Like, we created a term for it, and we made a whole guild called like You're Bummed, and all we did was just fly around the server, like killing people way up in the air where they couldn't res. And we developed quite a reputation, and it was really, really good times. That was some of the most fun I've ever had.
Good stuff. All right. Well, you've made it through the interview, OhhGee. Please, one more time for all the listeners, plug away. Where can people find you online?
Absolutely. So you guys can find me on Twitter at OhhGee_haptics. So that's just the letter O, the letter G, and then underscore haptics, HAPTIX. You can find me on YouTube if you just search OhhGee Haptics Gaming, or just my WoW name, OhhGee with OhhGee, the way I spell it in WoW. You'll find me on YouTube with that. And you can also find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/letter O, letter G, haptics. So just OhhGee, HAPTIX, one word. I'm trying to get consistent YouTube content out. Like I've said a few times, I work full time. I cast CSGO on the side. I play a lot of games. I'm a busy guy, but I'm as consistently as I can putting out YouTube stuff, and that is all going to be vanilla WoW stuff. So my YouTube heavily focuses on vanilla WoW PvP. As for Twitch, I'm not super active on Twitch right now because you can't stream vanilla. I'm planning on streaming a little bit of Battle for Azeroth launch. So I'm not super excited about playing BFA, but I really want to, start interacting with the community a little bit, and sort of give people a chance to just sort of chat with me. So I'm probably gonna be streaming some BFA for that reason at twitch.tv/OhhGee haptics, one word. And of course, when Classic comes out, I'm going to be streaming big time streaming. I'm definitely planning on clearing my schedule when Classic comes out, and I have some big plans. So stay tuned.
Excellent, as I'm sure many of us are. Well, look, OhhGee, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out for Countdown to Classic. You quite clearly really know your stuff, obviously about vanilla World of Warcraft in general, but also PvP. And as a person who's really trying to get involved in PvP and sort of learn everything from scratch, I just picked up a lot of great tidbits of information. So thank you so much for that. You know, really, realistically, the alternative name for the podcast is basically The Education of Josh Corbett, because I just am trying to get back into it all, and everything you said was just phenomenal, and I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun. You know, like I said, I could talk about this stuff all day, and I have a ton of respect for what you're building with this podcast and this brand. You know, I can tell that you put a ton of work into it, man, and this is really, really good stuff. I love how every week is a totally different topic, and I think, you know, anyone learn a lot from your podcast. So, you know I'm going to go back and listen to some of the ones about stuff that I'm maybe, you know, less of an expert on. But yeah, dude, thanks for having me on, and thanks for doing this, because this is so great for the community.
Thanks, mate. All right, we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, man. Take it easy.
Well, that's the interview with OhhGee done, and a huge thank you to him again for taking that time out for Countdown to Classic. OhhGee was such a great guy before, during, and after that talk, and he clearly knows his stuff when it comes to vanilla PvP. I've got no doubt that we could have gone another hour or two there, so I dare say we may well hear from him again later down the track on the show. But with the featured interview done, now it's time for a listener call in today's Calling Countdown. Okay, we've got another caller on the line now, and who are we speaking with?
This is Riv. How are you doing?
Hey, good, Riv. Thank you so much for calling in. Now, you and I, for the listeners' benefit, have been in touch for a couple of weeks now, and we've got something else coming up on the show that we'll talk about at the end of this call. But you got in touch with me saying that you had a couple of points that you'd love to hit on for the show, and the first of those perhaps we'll tackle will be, you mentioned something about some legendary weapons or rare items that you've had experience with in the game. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't have personal experience with it. I used to play on a server called Archimond, and it was one of the original servers that came out. I started playing WoW about a week after it had been released, and I don't remember how many servers there were, but there's quite a few larger guilds that came from other games like Dark Age of Camelot and EverQuest and all these other games. And they decided they wanted to keep fighting each other in Warcraft once Warcraft was coming out. And so it was basically agreed upon, hey, we're going to play on a PvP server. All these guilds agreed to it. And they said, we didn't know the names of the servers yet. So they said it's going to be the first alphabetical server. Whatever the server is called, that's what it's going to be. And so it ended up being Archimond. So tons of people played, and then the server filled up instantly, and the server was offline. It was only up for like one day, and then it went offline for like maybe 4 or 5 days or several days. I hadn't quite played yet, and then that kind of destroyed the plan, because a lot of the bigger guilds that planned on all fighting each other, they all jumped onto other servers scattered around here and there. So the idea never took off like it was supposed to. But there were quite a few big guilds that did decide to stay on the server, and one of the guilds was called Nerfed, and they ended up getting an item called the Talisman of the Binding Shard, and it was as far as I know, it's the first legendary drop ever in WoW. And they were on our guild. They were a Horde guild. I played Alliance. I played an Alliance mage, and they were a very good guild. They were probably the furthest progressed PvE guild, and they were the best PvP guild on the Horde as well. So they had all the best players. And the item, a lot of people probably don't even know it exists, but you can Google it. It's called the Talisman of the Binding Shard. And it was I guess from my understanding is that it's an item that was removed from the game because it wasn't supposed to be in the loot tables. I think it starts a quest when you get the item. Like I said, it's a neck piece that's really not that good. It's got some strength, some stamina, and some agility, but not crazy numbers like you'd expect from a legendary item. And it's got some nature and some fire resistance, but it has the orange text, which is really weird. We'd never seen that before when we were raiding. Someone started linking it in the Molten Core chat, and people started freaking out. And I'm not even sure how they linked it, because I played Alliance and it dropped on Horde, and while I was in Molten Core, and people started linking the item, and I'm not. Would you know how someone would even do that? Link chat from another faction?
No, I've got no idea. That's news to me.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how it was done, and I know you can't do it with. Maybe you could do it with Atlas loot, maybe a long time ago before they made some changes to it, but it was very weird. I never saw it linked again after that. After it dropped that one day, and it was kind of a weird item because it physically changed the appearance of your character. It was like a lightning ball thing that would float around your guy's neck and move around and stuff. And you could actually see if a player had the item or not just by looking at them without inspecting their gear or anything like that. So it was kind of cool that if you happen to have it. And that one player that had it, I believe he was a Fury Warrior, if I remember correctly. And that guild nerfed, they ended up leaving the server because it was a high population server. And they had a couple free transfers. So they left, but we used to see them in PvP, and you see the guy with the little lightning ball thing swirling around his neck, and he's running around wrecking everybody, their blue gear and stuff. So,
well, I'm just taking a look at it now, and just so everyone knows, I had no idea about this item because obviously, as you say, it was taken out relatively early by Blizzard. And you mentioned this to me a little while ago when you said you perhaps wanted to do this call, and you mentioned something in Discord, and I looked into it. And this was all, as I said, news to me, and I'm sitting here looking at it, and like you say, it's not incredibly impressive in that it doesn't leap off the page to you. We've got plus 13 strength, 5 agility, 8 stamina, 24 fire resistance, 24 nature resistance, and as you mentioned, when struck in combat, inflicts 4 nature damage to the attacker, and you've got the little lightning bolt look when you equip it. Yeah, definitely like not something that we're necessarily, I mean, for a neck piece, I guess it's okay, but it's still legendary, but it's not really when we think legendary, the kind of stats that we would attach to that kind of thought.
Yeah, it dropped off Baron Geddon, I believe, and a lot of people believe that it was supposed to be the precursor to getting the Wind Fury, the Wind Fury weapon, and that Blizzard at some point scrapped the idea and made it 2 separate shards like it is now that you kind of combine, and that somehow this neck piece got left in the game on accident. And as soon as it dropped once, they immediately hotfixed the game. They took the item out, so it's actually the most legendary item ever because it's only dropped for one person ever. Only one character has ever had it. And then he ended up transferring servers. I think he changed names or something like that. So there's some confusion. Some people say no, more than one person had it. It's the same person that's always had it. And he ended up transferring servers, and I think he changed his name, but it's the same player. He came from Earth.
So digging into perhaps why this might have been taken out. As you say, you said it was perhaps left in by accident by Blizzard. Has there been more information that you're aware of? And sorry, I'm not sure if I didn't catch it in what you might have said before. That's why I'm digging a little deeper. Do we know specifically, was this deemed to be, I mean, it couldn't have been deemed to be OP or anything. Why was it taken out? What was so broken with the object?
Well, it's not broken, but I think the quest was, because the item starts a quest, and I think the quest was probably never finished. I guess it was a broken object in the sense that it didn't do what it was supposed to, and I guess they had changed the way you would acquire the Wind Fury. I always forget what it's called, Thunder Seeker, Blessed Weapon of the Wind Fury, or whatever. I guess they changed how you would acquire that weapon, and they made it so that you don't need this necklace anymore. So they just removed it because it was a design or philosophy change in the game early on. And like I said, it was, it's a small drop, probably 1% or something. And one guild happened to get it, one player, and then they took it out immediately after that. But they let him keep the item, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool that they actually let the player keep the item. And looking into it on the wiki page, the player was his name was Nocturne, and as you mentioned, he was in the guild Nerfed on the Archimon server. Now, when you see things like that, and obviously, as you said, you were playing on that server and you saw everyone linking to it, reflecting back on legendary items like this in the game, if you just explained a bit about your experience and your past with World of Warcraft back in the vanilla days as well, do you wish that we had more legendary items in the game, or do you think the number that we got was perfect given their status as legendary?
I think legendary items are hard to acquire. They all stem around a pretty low drop chance. I don't know too much about the hunter legendary item. I think it's the leaf. I know the leaf drops in Molten Core, and I'm not sure what else you need to get to do that quest line. But they're all fairly rare drops, and I think it's a healthy amount of legendary items. I think current WoW, like everyone has like tons of legendaries, and makes it feel. It probably makes the items feel anything but legendary when you have to have 2 or 3, 4 pieces of legendary equipped just to join a pug raid or something like that.
It's definitely something that's become a bit of a bugaboo issue, I think. I mean, and this is a topic that might split a few people in terms of how much they enjoy retail or how much they perhaps dislike retail and what they've done with their itemization. But yeah, personally for me, when I jump in on retail and I see that purple is the new green, in a way, some people might be jumping up and down about that. That's sort of how I feel on a relatively rudimentary basis. It doesn't quite have the same sort of feeling for me, I know, when purples are a dime a dozen and I really don't feel like I have to do much to get them. And now it's like, what's the whole point of something? As we always say, if everything's awesome, then nothing is. So, do you hearken back to a time in vanilla when purple meant something and legendary obviously really meant something?
Yeah, I remember. I mean, of course, I played, long ago. I remember the first time I saw someone with a mount, and I was like, everyone was crowded around him in Ironforge. There was a guy it was a dwarf player, and he was on a mount, which is kind of crazy because I would have thought I would have seen a paladin or a warlock steed first, because you really only have to hit level 40 to get that. But this guy must have been a hardcore making gold somehow. But yeah, he had a ram mount. He was a dwarf player, and I remember everyone, I took a screenshot on my computer of it because I'd never seen a mount before, and I would just run everywhere. And I remember people dueling in front of Ironforge, and there was the hunter with full epic gear, and everyone was always inspecting him and stuff like that because he was the first player I ever saw with full epics and stuff like that. And they were hard to get. My first epic was a craft from Dire Maul. It's a cloth. It's not even really that good. It's a cloth belt that gives you like 1% crit or something like that. And I farmed all these mats and everything like that to eventually get it. And then a tailor in my guild made it for me. And it was a big deal. I finally had an epic piece. But yeah, the game has changed a lot if you compare that to retail. And the other thing about the legendaries is you had to have some amount of player skill, individual skill to get some of the legendaries. Like I know the hunter quest involved kiting certain types of mobs and using certain types of abilities. And if another player helped you or interfered, the mob would despawn. So you had to, do it yourself. The Benediction had a quest line tied in with it. And then of course getting the Atiyesh, you have to, kill Cthulhu, and then kill Kel'Thuzad and Naxxramas. So the 2 last bosses from the 2 hardest raids, you have to kill them in addition to acquiring all the splinters and stuff like that.
They definitely, they say you never forget your first purple, I hope. And, as you just relayed the story of your first, I'll never forget my first. Mine was actually, the Krollblade, which, I've spoken about earlier on the show, which I have a very, fond spot for within the game. But do you remember, you said you weren't particularly fond of that first purple that you crafted. Do you remember the first one that you got that you really cared about?
I don't remember the first one. I know I started getting some Arcanist stuff because I played a mage. I was a human mage. Yeah, I got the Talisman of Infernal Power or whatever from Ragnaros, and that was like a big deal when I got that. I was pretty excited about that because it's a pretty big DPS increase, and it also has nice use for PvP as well, because you can choose when to increase your burst damage and stuff like that. And the other thing about our first rag kill, a long time ago, and they patched this, we killed Ragnaros, we finally killed him, it was a big deal, and what dropped? The Shaman Tier 2 pants, which no one can even equip. So that was actually a thing in the game. I don't remember what patch it got fixed, but Paladin loot could drop for Horde players, and Shaman loot could drop for Alliance players, which is really dumb. But that got fixed. But yeah, that was our first Tier 2 legging was a Shaman, so we had to disenchant it, which is kind of a little disappointing on our first kill. But killing Ragnaros for the first time was pretty exciting, and I did get the Talisman, which was really cool.
Now, I'm not sure if you're a kind of, changes or no changes person, or if any of that sort of bothers you much at all. But you just mentioned that something that we haven't actually discussed on the show, which obviously a lot of people know about, in terms of tier pieces dropping for classes that weren't there when you got the Shaman Paladin sort of conflict going on between the factions. Is that something that and you said it irked you back in the day, is that something that you kind of hope Blizzard might address in Classic, in terms of if Horde's running in through raids, they don't want Paladin pieces dropping, and obviously vice versa with the Shaman for the Alliance? Is that something you'd like to see, or are you happy just leaving it as is, warts and all?
No, I'm sure that'll get changed. That's basically, I'm sure it was an oversight by the development community, because I don't think any other Paladin gear, if I don't remember right, I can't remember, but I don't think Shaman stuff was dropping from the other bosses, because they just dropped tier 1 stuff, and then maybe the tier 2 was mixed up. I can't remember. It's been so long, but I know that for a fact that the Shaman pants dropped off Rag on the first kill, and that was frustrating. So I'm mostly a no changes person, but I understand I need to make a few changes here and there, and stuff like that. One change that I know they will never make, because it's actually not even Blizz-like, but I would like it, was, how you have the high level players ganking, Lobies and Red Ridge and stuff like that.
Yep.
Well, that's fine. That's part of the game. That's part of PvP. It's what makes it fun. But the low level players have, they have no chance of fighting back. Every spell gets resisted. 90% of your spells get resisted fighting skull or question mark level player. And I think they should remove they won't do it, but it's like my little dream is that they would remove all the hit stuff for not for PvE purposes, because you got to balance it a little bit. But when a player fights another player, you should still have a 99% chance to land a hit on that player. Because let's say a level 40 goes into Red Ridge and starts arcane exploding all the level 18s down there. That level 40 player, he still has way more hit points. He has way more talents. He's got better gear. He's got, has access to higher level consumables, a higher level heal potions if he needs to heal for whatever reason. But it'd be cool if 20 low level players could just zerg him down and rush up. And everyone could just group up and, rush that guy down and snare him with entangling roots, and the spells would actually land, even if you're hitting for just a tiny amount of damage, or stuff like that. At least your spells are landing. Or if you're a high level player ganks you and you drop a Frost Nova, and you can maybe get away for a little bit. That should be part of the game. I think it'd be more fun, and you'd still probably get killed most of the time, but every once in a while you could escape a high level player just because your spells would actually land.
Now, Riv, I think you're roundabouts my age, so you might get this reference, but the analogy that I'm thinking of here is something like, the Scrappy Doo going, let me at him, and being held off at arm's length while all the swinging punches just land in air, is kind of how I feel when you're taking on a higher level player and just nothing is landing. So I know what you mean. At least let some of those little punches and jabs land.
Let it hit. Maybe 100 Scrappy Doos could do something.
Exactly.
I think it'd be kind of cool, and I think you'd have more players fighting back a little bit. They'd have to zerg down the enemy. You'd have to watch out for AOE, because it'd still kill you in 1 or 2 hits. But I think it'd be fun. I think it'd be fun also where you could, a hunter could drop a trap, and then it would actually, if the enemy player hit it, it would actually get slowed down or frozen. It wouldn't just resist the trap, and you could maybe get away. So I don't know. I think it would just add a little extra something fun to the game, but they would never change it. That's like I said, that's not even part of the game. The no changes, the hardcore no changes, people go crazy because that's not even Blizz-like. It's just a change for the sake of making a change. But I just wish that that's how they had originally designed the game, because I think it would have been more fun. It may make a world PvP a little bit more fun.
It would be fun when I think of things like bands of players getting together and getting 4 or 5 people together and being like the 60 busters going and hunting 60s, and someone lays the trap and then just out of the bushes a whole bunch of lobies converge. I mean, I think it would be fun as well.
Because people would try crazy stuff. You'd eventually get 100 level 1s, and they'd say, what if we all hit like Frostbolt at the same time on this, on this guy? Can we do anything? You'd slow him. So maybe it's a warrior and you can kite him around a little. You got 100 people just hitting him for 15 damage a person, but it's 100 people doing it, so they could. I don't know. I just think it'd be a fun change for the game.
No, I agree with you. I do agree with you that it's highly unlikely, but I appreciate thinking outside of the box. So I'm totally with you on that one. Now, so another thing that you mentioned you wanted to touch on was obviously, as you said, you were back in the game from the first week of vanilla, and we're coming back to Classic now 14 years later, and as I suggested, I feel like we're around the same age, and you said that you wanted to talk about what Classic might be like for perhaps the more mature gamers. And the funny thing to me that nobody really talks about in depth with Classic is that the average demographic, the age is going to be a little bit higher than gamers are used to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there will be a lot of older players coming back. But everyone's got more limited time now. I work, full time, and I worked full time, when the game first came out. I was in my mid 20s, I guess, and now I'm 42 years old now. So, but now on top of working full time, I've got 2 kids, I have a wife, I have other obligations, things that I have to do that take priority over the game. So I will try to play when I can, but I'm, I don't have that much time to play. I think because of stuff like that, because gamers are getting older, you've got more players. Games like with microtransactions and stuff, and I'm very anti-microtransaction, but the people that are paying to basically support the WoW pet shop and stuff, those aren't 20-year-old players in college that are eating ramen noodles. Those are people in their 40s and stuff like that have a lot of expendable income, and they're going to buy gold, or they're going to buy a WoW token, or they're going to buy some vanity skins for another game. They're going to buy gems for a handheld game, and those are the ones that are paying for that stuff because they're trying to buy their competitive edge, where they're a little more limited on time, so they're trying to buy back into the game financially. I guess trying to stay competitive that way. But I've always been kind of anti-shop, and I am playing on Northdale, one of the newer private servers, and I'm only like level 33. So I think most players in the game are, I don't know, in their 40s, maybe early 50s now, maybe. I'm not sure. I know I was with the leveling curve because I played the first day. It came out a little bit, and it was pretty nutty. And now I'm clearly behind the leveling curve because the zones, you can actually do all the quests now, and you don't have to wait forever to find a mob and stuff like that. So it's probably best to be ahead of the pack or behind them. If you're in the middle of the pack, it can be a little rough.
Do you think that sort of the full-time job and the life commitments and everything, and still dabbling in WoW on the side when Classic comes out, could in a way be a little bit of a benefit in that you are somewhat forced to stop and smell the roses, and the journey will be longer for yourself and perhaps many others, in that if you had all the time, you may just be zerging to 60 and might not enjoy it as much, if you know what I'm saying. Do you think it's actually got some hidden pros to the fact that you won't have all the time in the world to play the game?
It may. One of the things I'm looking forward to is I already know what the end game content. The end game content will be next Ramus, so there's no rush for me to get there quick. I can level at my pace. I can, get there at the speed that I want to, and I know that the gear that I acquire is not going to get wiped out with a new expansion or anything like that. If it takes me a couple of years to eventually get around to raiding enough to get the items that I need, then it takes me a few years to do it, or it takes me a while. I did raid Nax back in vanilla, but we never cleared it. We cleared, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 bosses in Nax Ramus, and we ended up getting the splinters or whatever that drop off various bosses, and we tried Nax for several months. We never cleared too much of it, but we actually had a guy in our guild that got the Atiesh, because there was another guild on our server. They're called Damage Networks. They're pretty good, and they basically brought him along so he could kill Cthulhu. And then they brought him along to kill Kel'Thuzad on one of their runs, because he had all the splinters and stuff he needed. He just needed the other 2 boss kills. And we never could kill Cthulhu. We killed the Twin Eps, but never could kill Cthulhu. And then did about maybe like a third of Nax or something like that. So he got his legendary weapon like a week or 2 before BC came out, which is really cool. And we just I would like to go back and finish where I left off. I'd like to finish Nax, kill Cthulhu this time. I just haven't had the chance to do any of that, and I don't have to worry about. As far as I know, I don't have to worry about another expansion coming along, and everyone jumps from that to the new expansion. So hopefully, I will be able to finish what I started 15 years ago.
Okay, well, Riv, I know you've got to head off, but for the listeners' benefit, I'll just let everyone know that Riv will actually be coming back on the show quite soon, because he and I are going to be doing something a little bit fun on Countdown to Classic. Now, Riv, you work for the homicide department of a major top 10 population-wise American city, and we're going to have a bit of fun with an investigation into who really killed Man Crick's wife. And thankfully, Riv, you've put up with my sort of eclectic thoughts with how we can do that, and I'm sure that'll be a lot of fun when we eventually get to record that, and I look forward to that. But thanks so much for calling in today.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, that's Calling Countdown, and that's the show for the day, everyone. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Just before I let you go, I want to shout out to the members of the Countdown Council. So, shout out to Borzen, Flosy B, Raidmar, Palfurus, Permadrunk, Rarebit, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Volaco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be the same without your support. And also a big thank you to supporters Bossman764, Hurlbert, Good Kisser, Myrtlebanks, Purgatos81, and Zudamos, as always. You'll next hear from the show later in the week. So, as always, until then, keep counting, everyone.